what we what I'm going to present today is to focus more on the theoretical aspect of what we have been doing, and this is like just like an introduction also to what Dr. Umar Ryad and Dr. Talaat will present in their presentation. So we started with the idea of trying to use corporate ethics as a field, as a new field of study, to start looking into approaches and technologies that will help us to analyze a huge corpus of Arab magazines at the end of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century, sorry, the end of 19th century and beginning of 20th century. And through this work, we were trying to introduce a new way of looking at the development of certain concepts over time in the Arab world, and to revisit certain concepts also that have been on the spot right now in academia in the West, with regard to racial studies, with regard to minority studies, etc., and to see how this has been evaluated in the Arab world during that period, the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. So we have only a few major research endeavors that focus exclusively on digitizing, analyzing Arabic texts. With the help of Emad and his team, we were going beyond that, beyond like collecting materials, into being able to analyze them. And we like came to Emad with a specific research question, and the technical part of the project will help us to get some kind of like accurate answers for them. Most of these projects that work on Arabic right now are working on classical Arabic, as opposite to modern standard Arabic, which is the focus of our project. We tried also to make like digital repository of material analytics tool available to researchers, and Emad will talk about the platform for the project by the end of today, around 3 p.m. We'll talk about that platform. Okay. The interest in this project, for someone like myself coming from like literature and culture, it starts with reading in Frank Moody, and he's focused on distance reading, which he defines where distance is a condition of knowledge. It allows you to focus on units that are much smaller, much larger than the text, devices, themes, tropes, or genres and systems. What actually Frank Moody is doing is trying to go beyond the selectivity that is governed by ideology, that is governed by what we can name in Arabic shilaliya. It's this kind of selectivity is based on personal bias towards a specific group of people, and those group of people are groups of people. They are representing the majority, and while they are actually less than 0.5% of the total. He did the same thing with regard to the representation of the literary canon or the English novel, etc. But I was thinking about it in a broader way. How we can look at this, and this has been actually connected to the Arab Spring moment. And this has been connected to the Occupy Wall Street moment, where they were talking about the 99%. Versus the 1% who is in control. So I got this through my background in cultural studies. I get this all connected together. Like it's not only about literature; it's about everything actually. So I was looking at distance reading as giving us the opportunity to see everything and to be able to go beyond this kind of personal bias. And what we discovered in the magazine which I'll talk about them shortly, Al-Manar, Al-Risala, Al-Mashrif, and the others, is that the names we know are not the only ones. The names who are very famous are not the only ones. And we started to discover names that we have never heard before. And they have important contributions that we need to discover. One of the things also that Maurizio talked about, and is part of what Emad was presenting in his work, is the network theory. This is a theory that discusses connections within large group of objects. The objects can be just about anything and are usually called nodes or vertices. And these connections are usually called edges. I think this is also is related to what Professor Amr Sabri presented in the keynote speech for this conference, and how we can find connections between what we think is exclusive to our moment, which is not true. And once we started to uncover the network between scholars, between different contributions from different people, we started to find that, as I used to tell my students in the class about text and textuality, there is no factual thing that we can call a beginning, like the source of things. We usually say that this has started in England, this has started in the US. This is not true. Because there will be a moment later when we discover that we decided that it started in Egypt and actually started in Iraq, or it started somewhere else. So the network theory in this context is very important. The life of the corpus and the speed of the search, as Maurizio said, have increased beyond all expectations. Today, we can replicate in a few minutes investigations that took months and years of work. What he is saying here is exactly what we were thinking about when we have tons of material from different magazines. We collected also like all work stuff, which is part of what we will do in the future, and we'll see how like when we talk about one writer like Tahsin and the development of certain concepts over time, and why they are happening. Why there is a change in let's say the scholarly mode of Tahsin at certain points of time. Why this is happening, and how this is connected to the larger social, political, historical context. These kind of questions we are able to discover through these computational tools. For example, what Maurizio presented in his book about graphs, trees, and maps, he was looking at the Shakespearean play Hamlet. And he made the connections between the different characters and looking at how Hamlet as a character is very central. And this has been connected through the network, through how Hamlet is connected to all other characters. Once you remove Hamlet, you feel that there is a huge gap there. And this doesn't take Maurizio or anyone studying Hamlet to read the text, to do the close reading in order to discover this. We just digitized the text and discovered the network between the main character and the other characters, and that was very clear. So let's just imagine that what Maurizio did in Hamlet, we can do in a course of millions of pages or hundreds of thousands of pages. We can go to the next one. One also of the theoretical formation for this project is came from Edward Iwan. And he talked about the leprosy. I think also this is related to what was presented by Professor Amr Sabri at the keynote speech. So the leprosy is the way that we think about things, not in the logical way, but to try to come into it from a different angle. And this is what distance reading is providing us with. So lateral thinking, learn how to change the focus of your thinking. You will learn the difference of defining your focus and sticking to it. And how to do that by generating ideas, alternatives, how to use concepts as a breeding ground for new ideas. Sometimes we just look beyond the obvious alternatives. So we know that if I say who are the most, if I talk about English novels, Egyptian novels, for example, you will have certain names come to your mind. You'll say Nabi Mahfouz, you'll say the famous name. So this will not help you to generate ideas or new ideas about the Egyptian fiction, for example, because you will be just like any other scholar, you will be just finding the names that are famous, that are known, that you read the work, but you will not be able to bring other examples because they are not famous. They are not selected by the group of people, the Shirawiya, who choose this and that. This doesn't mean that Raheem Mahfouz or others are not worthy of this kind of recognition, but what I say that there are many others who are just unknown because they didn't have access to the group of intellectuals, the group of scholars who give these more this kind of recognition. And the challenge, breaking you free from the limits of traditional thinking. This is one of the aspects of the lateral thinking. So you see it in a different way about and this is because I have been focusing a lot on the Egyptian fiction, but this is another example. Like racial studies right now in the US. And racial studies is claimed to be originated from the US because of the social movement, the African Americans, etc. But when we find within the Arabic corpus we have here, that there have been a lot of discussion in the Egyptian magazines in the late 19th century, early 20th century, that can actually tell us more about what is going in the US right now. That can help us like present a new, a different dimension to this kind of debate about the race problem. I think a good example when we talk about that. Like when I started doing my PhD in American studies, and I started to switch my focus on how we define America from within the Arab world. And then I started to go back to writings by different authors, and one of them was Sarwar. And I found out they making an introduction to the book as Introduction to American Studies. And this was 1926. And Sarwar was talking about exactly what Shirley Fisher presented in her presidential address for the American Studies Association in 2002, which made a huge impact on the field of study, starting what is now known as transnational American studies, which is about we should get people from outside the U.S. to define the U.S. So he was talking about the same thing in 1926. We can see here how there is a change in the way we. My father is a professor, very famous professor in this field in American studies. She was shocked. And she said, he was talking about transnational American studies even before Christian. So you can just imagine how many things, ideas, you can discover, not only within the Arab world. I mean, if we have this kind of digital humanities in all different languages, we will discover a lot of what formulated our conceptual way of thinking about this and that can be traced back to Iraq, to Iraq, to the other parts of the world. Random entry using unconnected input to open up new lines of thinking. This is exactly what Emad is doing in using these digital tools. We have random entry, so we have let me correct me, video on the phone and referee it and taken like the clusters. So the way we do these clusters around this specific themes, it's a random way of doing it. And it's random in the sense that it refers to the existence of certain themes within the context in a random way, but in an organized way as well, because they're connected together into specific themes. But it takes you into some kind of the ability to see the circulation of ideas within a big corpus. The vocation and movement is relating to statements and using them to build new ideas. I think I already talked about that. And then I will take it also back to PhD. One of my favorite graduates and physics. And my students here in this room, they know that we talk about tradition and the individual sense a lot. So this is part of tradition and the individual side. The historical sense, which is a sense of the timeless as well as of the temporal and the timeless and of the temporal together, is what makes the writer tradition. And it's at the same time what makes the writer more conscious of his place in time, of his own contemporaneity. So this kind of historical sense, what Ellis refers to as a historical sense, is what exactly through this experience, this project, what exactly these tools are really does. Because what we believe that it's new, it's unprecedented, you can find through the materials you digitize and you try to propose that what you think is unprecedented is not so. And this is related to the change in the way we form these concepts, the way we name them. And this it happened also with C.S. Ellis himself. In my master's degree in Egypt, I talked about objectivity as a critical criterion used by Ellis. But when I traced the same concept back, I found that Matthew Arnold talked about it as disinterestedness, for example. The same thing, but differently. Not only to artists of any art, having this complete meaning alone. His significance, his appreciation is the appreciation of his relation to the great poet and artist. So not only his music. And this is how he is connecting the individual time to the tradition. You cannot value him alone. You must sit him for contrast and comparison among the different. And this is what your tools are doing. So we use this contrast and comparison with the dead. So giving these, so we have our own research working, which is related to our moment right now, which is related to what we think is relevant to what we are passing through right now. But at the same time, we'll go back. Why this is important? I mean, at the Arab Spring moment, for example, most of the literary scholars, they want to say that this moment came from nowhere. It happened like that. It just out of it. But using this tool, we can trace back what happened during this moment to earlier time. Why part of what we were focusing on in this project is to focus on the plugins. These plugins, in the street, in the Arab street, it came from nowhere or it had a history. When they say it's for real in Syria, it has something to do with variables or variable meaning for Irish, for example. Sharia is giving the new definition during this moment. Sharia is different than what it used to be said by the Egyptians before 1952 when we organization. So we see the development of these concepts how they serve, how the others will feel the redefined, how the others is no more the English or the American culture or an Egyptian culture. So the other person is giving a new different definition in this context. Someone said the dead writers are remote for us because we know so much more than they did, precisely, and they are that which we know. I think this is also related to what these tools are presenting, and what we know was already there. What we are trying to do with these digital tools is to prove that what we know is what the others talked about maybe decades, maybe centuries ago. So this is how we started with the project. We started to acquire, digitize, and take code. Emad and his team were working on developing the cultural analytics tools. We have specific case studies, and we have been over the past year trying to disseminate our findings of the application. So what are the case studies? We started actually focusing on two case studies. One of them is related to these journals and newspapers from various Arab countries. As I said, they started from the 19th century. We had many research questions in mind with Islam. At the beginning of the project, for example, we were interested in to see how leading writers of the field of Islamic reformism disseminated ideas across the faith and life. What teaches my students about modernity, for example, as a concept? Do we consider modernity as something that started during the late 19th century or the 18th century until the mid 19th century, as many scholars used to read? Or modernism is, or modernity is in itself an idea, or an action, or a kind of practice. And we can trace these practices earlier to the old Egyptian civilization, or we can trace it to the beginning of the Muslim state in Mecca and Medina 1400 years ago. How we can look into these practices as a form of modernity practiced by people over different times, periods of time. And I always tell them about this example of Abu Dhar al-Ghifari when he called Bilal ibn Rabah, Ibn Sawdat, a son of a black woman. And Bilal went to the Prophet and complained, and the Prophet called Abu Dhar and told him, "You are لك امرؤ فيك جاهلية." And he used this. So this also it provokes us to think about Jahiliyyah. So Jahiliyyah is not a thing of time before Islam. It's an action, it's a practice. I mean, we can look at modernity at the same time, in the same sense. I mean, we can look at modernity as something related to practice more than it is to a specific time frame. The second case study is very interested in the Arab diaspora, especially in North America, and their contribution not only to the Arab world. I used when I was studying at Al-Azhar, we used to study Al-Nahj, for example, and their impact on what's going on in the Arab world. But we can also talk about them as contributing to the different types of discourses within the Western world. So how can we do that if we don't have a complete sense of what the Arabs in diaspora are presenting during different periods of time? So we're interested, for example, in the development of Arab Islamic feminisms that have had their origins in critical studies on ijtihad and Western discussions. So this part of the project we haven't conducted yet, I think we have a lot for future work. So what these two cases are trying to highlight are the silences, continuities, and the changes in the intellectual transition from modern Arab and within the modern Arab Islamic thought. So one critically important outcome of digitizing the contemporary works of Arab diaspora in the West is to chart the ways in which their works build upon each other to create a unique corpus of research and writing that is referencing databases within the local Western context while being open simultaneously and transnational connected to political events and intellectual terms, not only in the Middle East and North Africa or in the Arab world, but also within the Western community. I think this would be the beginning to reach the stage that African Americans reach right now to think about themselves as unique and as combining the both parts, Africa and the United States. Arab Americans, until this moment, that they are still in the question of hyphenated or not hyphenated. They are still thinking about themselves as being only Arab or only American, and they don't see the what I would say the conceptual formation that's coming from the Arab world versus the conceptual formation that's coming from the West, together building up something that can be called Arab American. And in this case, they might be able to build up, for example, in literature, they can build up a literary theory that traces its root back to the Arab world and to the Arab tradition and to the Arabic, all the poetry, for example. And to make these connections will help also to see how the Arabic literature is within what can be defined as the American literary canon. Is part of what can be defined as the American literary canon. And in this case, we will be able to go beyond the literal and superficial question of the West as the point of departure, the West as the center, etc. We can go beyond that question. We can just start a new point of departure, where we say that we are actually part of your intellectual thought, of your literary thought. And you, by putting us out and saying that you are the center, we are part of that center. Okay, also, I referred here to the development of Arab Islamic feminism that have had their origin in the critical studies in Ijtihad. For example, Mahmoud's study on highest agency in Egypt has sparked tremendous debate about what secularism means, how minority religious self-expression can survive or assert itself in a Western secular environment, and how one can have agency within the Islamic parameter without having to pay difference to Western liberal tropes of narratives. The impact of this work is built only on minority-majority relations in the West, insofar as minorities yield from her work the capacity to articulate their demands for religious freedom on their own terms, but also transnationally upon the Arab and Muslim world, where debate continues to rage about whether women need a secular society to ensure their rights are protected and agency assured. Through this kind of work, researchers can have a place to build genealogy on the development of Islamic women's agency and the ethics of Islamic women's subject formation in context of Western secular society and non-Western secular or Islamic society. So the debate between secular versus liberal, etc., can be deconstructed in this way, because secular doesn't mean securing the rights of women, and liberal doesn't mean securing the rights of women, and Islamic doesn't mean denying the rights of women. So the whole discourse can be reconstructed in this way. Okay, the last point is about the methodology. So what Emad is doing is presenting us with these tools that enable some kind of like quantitative data, names, locations, associated patterns, relationships, even with regard to the sentiment analysis to be included in this. And then the research team will go with the qualitative evaluations and analysis. So we used to say it's moving from distance reading to close reading. So it highlights this distance reading, this quantitative data. It takes us into like some kind of, I would say, like virtual trip within the corpus to see where specific concept starts and how it develops, etc. And then we take it into specific periods of time to see how the evolution of this concept happened and why it happened. And we do it in the historical context, and we see that the social context, and we see the cultural context, etc. So this is with regard to the methodology. I think this is enough, and thank you so much.
There aren't any questions for Dr. Eid. We'll move to Dr. Umar Ryad or Ryad, who is a professor of Arabic and Islamic Studies at the University of Luaven and member of the Young Academy of Belgium. Prior to that, he has worked as assistant professor at the University of Leiden, as an associate professor at Utrecht University. He has earned a BA in Islamic Study in English from Al-Azhar University in Cairo, followed by an MA degree in Islamic Studies and a PhD degree, both from Leiden University. He also taught at the Universities of Bern and Oslo, and was a research fellow at the University of Bonn and the Berlin Graduate School Muslim Culture and Society. The Leibniz Zentrum Moderner Orient, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this correctly, but it's in Berlin, and the Leibniz Institute of European History in Mainz. He is a board member of the Netherlands Inter-University School of Islamic Studies. He leads the European Research Council project, which focuses on the history of Muslims in interwar Europe. His current research also includes the dynamics of the network of pan-Islamist movement, Arab perception of Orientalism, Muslim polemics on Christianity, and transnational Islam on the modern world. Dr. Umar or Amr, the stage is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for. Do you hear me well?
Can hear you.
Okay, I'm trying. And you see the presentation as well?
Yes.
Hearing echo my speaking, so I don't know how to solve it. Anyhow, what I'm gonna do today in relation to what I'm hearing my echo and this is responding. Is this also the case in the room?
No, we are okay in the room. We hear you very well.
Okay, then I will not focus on my own echo. Anyhow, what I'm trying to do today is just like to give you a glimpse in some of the research which we have done in joint work, and I would just say it's not only my own work, it's also in collaboration with Emad. Just we have tried to use some of the tools which Emad have tested within the project and to apply the distant and the close reading, I mean, just at the same time. What we would like to argue, I think the computational and digital studies are very important, and I would say this is, as a historian in the beginning, I had really big doubts about it. I mean, just the first time when I talked about with Emad about that, I was just like doubting, no, this is impossible. But once I have seen the results, especially when it comes to Al-Manar, which Eid has mentioned, and Talaat will come just in a minute to discuss Al-Manar and the Risala as well, I was really surprised, and I thought, no, there is something that should happen here, which is a collaboration between the computational results and the close reading done by humanities scholars. And I think this collaboration is very, very needed. So it's not only the work of the computational scientist, but also of the scholar of humanity. And they should work together in order to verify, on the one hand, because the computational scientist needs, he invents the tools, he experiments the tools, or she experiments the tools, but we should come up with the questions. What do we need to solve? And the vice versa also. So the computational tools can get results that we cannot grasp with our own eyes when you are reading the materials. As Eid has said, that all of a sudden in these magazines, you see people actually whom you didn't know before, but probably you don't know them, but they have contributed to the whole cultural history of the Arab press in that time. But why Al-Manar? I would say Al-Manar, first of all, we are lucky that it's friendly available. So it just like it has been digitized or typed many years ago in Cairo in the 90s. I mean, just a group of researchers and typists just sat together and typed it and made it available digitally. And this makes it very friendly for us, because you are not really encountered with the OCR problems, and then it's ready made. It's first of all, it's a global magazine. I would say that Rashid Rida was a print global mufti, as he has been called in historical sources. He was a propagator of Muslim reform worldwide, which means that if you study Al-Manar, you could also reach out to other parts of the Muslim world and beyond also, in order to understand how he propagated this idea of Muslim reform. It's also a mine of information about the Muslim world. It's really a great window. It's not only about the religious discourse, but it's also about the political, social, medical, scientific developments, translation movements in the Arab and Muslim world. It includes also a wide transnational network. We know that Rida, I'm not going to get into this in much detail, but what we know that he is part of this, what we call the triangle of Islamic reform. I mean, just you see Afghani in the beginning, and then Mohamed Abdu, and then Rashid Rida as a Syrian scholar who traveled to Egypt in the late 19th century in order to be a close disciple of Mohamed Abdu, as we know. Al-Manar, it's decades of reform. We are talking now about the first issues, which was late 18, it was in December, January 1897 and 98, till Rashid does this in 1935. I have to emphasize something that we see when we come to the writers. You see that the Al-Manar was issued 5 years after Rashid does this, four issues by the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, Hassan al-Banna, but this is something I will talk about later in a minute. Just in order to understand Rida's network, I would like to mention this anecdote. I think many of the colleagues who are attending know it, but I think I should repeat it again in order to understand the network, this transnational network of Rashid Rida on the basis of his archives. And I think once we have this archive, this personal archive, which was in the position of his grandson in Cairo and now in Darat al-Malik Abdul Aziz in Riyadh, I think once we have this archives, which contain Rida's diaries, about 1,500 letters from all parts of the world, if we have it digitized and we combine it with Al-Manar, I think the digital tools can build up another network that we didn't know. I mean, because these letters are sent to Rida by people who did not participate in Al-Manar as writers, but participated in the network of reform we were talking about it, which was worldwide. So in his archive, you come across this letter, 13 letters sent to him by Zaki Hishmat Bey Kiram, somebody living in Berlin, and then I will go quickly for that because many of you know the story. And then you come, you think about how to find it. You follow the telephone directory, and then his son is there. He died some years ago, and then you go and you find other archives. So I think if you within the network of Rashid Rida or around the network of the Rashid Rida, make these archives, either Rashid Rida's archives or the people in his network available, put it with Al-Manar or any other materials or journals, I think it could expand our knowledge and also add to our knowledge things that we do not know only in the official history. I mean here the official history is the magazine itself. Here you have not only formal correspondences, but also informal correspondences talking about many things of not only intellectual, but also human aspects of their life. When Emad was just like doing this exercise, I will not get into these technical details because sometimes I do not understand them, and I think Emad, you may correct me if I say anything wrong because these are your results. You see the number of articles in Al-Manar, how many words. We counted now 370 writers, more or less, but we have to emphasize that Rida himself contributed to 70%. And here I would like just to say something about that. Actually, as a student of Al-Manar, I mean, just somebody who studied Al-Manar for many times, my assumption, without knowing anything about these digital and computational tools, I was saying Rashid Rida wrote almost 75%. This was my impression. It was only an impression after reading the whole corpus of Al-Manar. And here, when Emad came up with this result, I was very, very happy that actually your sense as a student of a corpus fits within what the digital results would come up. Here you have just a list of writers. Here, actually, I would say Ibn Taymiyyah for sure as a writer, okay, is just like, you know, replicating or duplicating or repeating what he has said, but anyhow, we could live with that. Here, Hassan al-Banna, I think we have to be careful about that because therefore I asked Emad, please try to make the exercise without Hassan al-Banna. Why? Because Hassan al-Banna published these 4 issues after Rashid Rida's death, after 5 years of Rashid Rida's death. If you think about it, neither Hassan al-Banna nor Muslim Brotherhood was mentioned in Al-Manar in Rashid Rida's lifetime. So he was a student of Rida. The father of Hassan al-Banna also published things in Al-Manar publishing house about Musnad Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. They were friends, they communicated together, but Rida never mentioned Hassan al-Banna, neither Hassan al-Banna nor the Muslim Brotherhood in 7 years from 28 till 35 in the year of Rashid Rida's death. My assumption is either Hassan al-Banna and the Muslim Brotherhood were not prominent in Rida's life, or they did not attract his attention. They were busy in other things like Jamiyat Shubban al-Muslimin or Al-Fath magazine. But anyhow, this is just like a footnote in order just like, you know, to know about the results. So we removed this part of Hassan al-Banna and we started to think about this. And this is what Emad has done. From Ash-Shamila, he extracted text and then paragraph, sentence, and then what you see here. And at the end, you reach the idea of topic modeling, and then these topics through authors and topics, and then you have the quantitative analysis, and then comes the qualitative analysis, which I have done. And I will mention some examples of the results and how did I verify and look into them. The computational results, what you see here, I have clustered them. You see the topics. We were just before I speak about that, we were just discussing the idea how many topics or models do we need. We started with 200, but this expands the whole thing, and this means that the clustering of the topics will be very difficult because you shattered the whole information around you have, or the quantity you have of topics around 200 topics. This was not really good for both of us. Then we minimized 200, and then we reached 50, and 50 was a thing that we could live with, both of us. I think the results with 50 were very, very I mean, just like, you know, we can talk about the subjectivity of the choice of the topics, but at the end of the day, you should choose for something that would help both tools and both methods you are going to use in the corpus. So on the basis of the diagrams or the topics that the machine has resulted, I have clustered them in 6 topics. Reform and progress, and you see the percentage of I mean, just the computational percentages that you have, the things talking about progress and reform, government, caliphate, politics, and its functions. You see here also the topics with their percentages, Europe and colonialism, Christianity and missions, and this is something actually I was surprised about because I have studied Christianity and missions in Al-Manar, and I thought that this is actually, it has a big portion in Al-Manar. Qualitative, it's very important, very significant if you look at Racio-religious impact on the debates about Christianity. But from a quantitative point of view, compared to other subjects, I was myself surprised that it is less than the other topics. We know that government and caliphate and reform, this is something, I mean, just the overarching political and intellectual and religious ideas of Rida. Education and upbringing, this was also very, very remarkable. And then creation, cosmos, and natural science. So I have divided this in these 6 clusters. Now, what is very important here, my observation by exercising this close reading, to see the high spikes in historical perspective. And this is something I would like to dwell upon for a while. I will give you some examples of this, and then we will come up to the end of my presentation by a conclusion. What you see here, you see that the high spike, it is from the beginning of Al-Manar, and then it pops up in 1900, and then 1900, 02, 03, and then you have a high and then drop, and at the end of the Al-Manar you don't find anything about education. So it's about education, children here. So it's about education, upbringing, children, etc., etc. And this is actually very simple to solve. I mean, if you think about these here, these dates, it's exactly when Rashid Rida was engaged in translating of a debate in France about the education of children, about childhood, physical education. Jean-Jacques Rousseau and other French writers, educationists were engaged in this debate in Europe in the 19th century. And on the advice of Mohamed Abdelaziz Mohamed, who was a prosecutor at the tribunal of the town of Zaqaziq in the Egyptian Delta, he was a good translator, Arabic-French translator. He was as also a student of Mohamed Abdu, who was urged and encouraged to translate this French debate into Arabic under the title Amil al-Qarn al-Tasi' Ashar. And here you see that Al-Manar published a series of articles on the basis of this translation, which was later compiled in one volume, one collection. So it's a very simple explanation. This is a computational result, and when you read, you dig into Al-Manar, you find, yeah, it's understandable that it is exactly in these years when the serialized articles were published in Al-Manar. Model 5 was here also occupied, you know, this percentage of what you see there of the whole corpus, and it was about congresses, committees, resolutions, and you see here, interestingly, the years when it pops up before I mean, just a few years before the First World War, and the high spike comes again in the early 20s. And this is also very simple to explain from a historical point of view, because you see Mu'tamar, Majlis, Lijan, Hukuma, Qanun, A'da, etc., etc. And these are the explanation, the historical explanation. What you see in 1911 here, the spike is getting very high. It is because of the organization of the Coptic Congress, which was convened at Asyut in southern Egypt. This Coptic Congress was launched or convened after the assassination of the Coptic Prime Minister Boutros Ghali in 1910 by a member of the National Party, Ibrahim Nasif al-Wardani. Ibrahim Nasif al-Wardani was an Egyptian student in Switzerland. He returned, but he was also a member of the anarchist groups in Europe. And when he returned it back as an Egyptian nationalist, he killed killed Boutros Ghali, the prime minister at this time. And this has erased and triggered a very huge debate among Muslims and Copts regarding the relationship. And this is actually one of the most critical points in Egyptian history when it comes to Coptic and Muslim relationship. You know, and Ibrahim al-Wardani, just like people, just like, you know, he at the end, he was I mean, just he got the capital punishment, but people just has announced him as a hero at this time, and demonstrations were all over the country in order to support him, because Boutros Ghali was involved as the head of the tribunal which executed the peasants in the Din Shuai case, as we know. So Rida wrote a series of articles, Al-Muslimun wal-Qibt wal-Mu'tamar al-Misri, which he later also published in a volume. When it comes to the 20s, this is very interesting to see that Rida was also writing about the Paris Peace Conference and the Versailles Treaty in the wake of the First World War. So this is actually the simple explanation. Then we come to this interesting one, that is the topic modeling 43, and you see Mecca Hajj rituals. And this is exactly in 1960. Why is the pike is very high? Because it's very simple. Rashid Rida's Hajj. This is into Hajj in that year, and he wrote a kind of memoirs, a kind of religious, you know, explanation of the sites, his own experience in the Hijaz, etc., etc. So it's very, very simple to explain also from a historical point of view why. So you see that he's discussing the Hajj when the season comes, a few articles about the significance of Hajj, the religious meaning, etc., etc. But exactly in 1916, this was because of his journey to the Hijaz and Mecca. Then we come to topic model 8, and you see independence, Syria, Palestine, and the demand to liberate them from the colonial yoke. The Syrian-Palestinian Congress, which was founded in 1918, and this Syrian-Palestinian Congress traveled to Europe in 1921, and Rida was the president of the Syrian-Palestinian Congress, which was came to Europe in order to demand the liberation and the independence of Syria and Palestine, to present the case to the League of Nations in Geneva. And you see here also very simple explanation that it comes, the spike goes high when it talks about this independence, the French, British, you know, and Iraq. This actually because of his activities, Rida's activities, and his network in that year. Now we come now to, but I would like to get this two things about medical and scientific issues. We have seen that it was model 20, and this is very interesting because you see also from 13 to 16 and from 24 till 27, and there are two explanations for these high spikes in these years. So from the year of 13 till 17, and from the 24, as I said, to 27. And the first one is because of the contribution of the Egyptian medical doctor, and he was also the personal doctor of Rashid Rida and his family, his GB, Mohamed Tawfiq Sidqi. And Mohamed Tawfiq Sidqi, very interestingly, I contacted his family in Cairo, and they have sent me some pictures of their grandfather. It's really fascinating. This is the first time to see a picture of his. You know, he was a student of medicine, came into the circle and network of Rashid Rida as a Muslim, doubtful because he doubted some tenets of Islam, and Rashid Rida is the one to convince him about the reliability of Islam and Islamic beliefs. And here Tawfiq Sidqi started to write about the reliability of the Sunnah. He wrote a series of articles, Al-Islam huwa al-Quran wahda, because he doubted some the authenticity of some hadith. And it is very, very remarkable that Rashid Rida opened his magazine as an outlet to Mohamed Tawfiq Sidqi to raise these doubts about the authenticity of the isnad of some hadith from a medical scientific point of view. The whole discussion regarding that issue was on one hadith which Sidqi did not accept from a scientific medical point of view, which is called in in the Sunnah works as Hadith Zubaba. We know about it, that when the fly gets in your drink, just immerse it, because one wing carries the cure, one wing carries the disease. From a medical and scientific point of view, this was not acceptable for Sidqi, and he started to write about the Sunnah from that scientific point of view. Christianity, he wrote about Christianity in many polemical works, because he translated some of these works on Christianity from higher biblical and lower biblical criticism, and he integrated them in Al-Manar. Application of modern and medical and scientific discoveries to Islamic concepts, this was his part. So this is from 13 till 17, what you see there. The other one is this health and disease, which exactly comes with this. And this is because of Rida's interest in Mahatma Gandhi. It was very remarkable to see that Rida was translating Mahatma Gandhi's work about under the title Kitab al-Sahha, Book of Health, which Mahatma Gandhi wrote, and it was translated by an Iraqi Indian associate of Rashid Rida into Arabic, into a series of articles in Al-Manar in the late 20s. This about missions, church, and you see that it's just like, you know, it's all over the place, but you see that it jumps again because of Tawfiq Sidqi's writing about that. This is actually before the conclusion. I would like to come to this case in order to confirm what Aid has said, that you see that the computational tools, they bring people who greatly contributed to the Arabic press, but we don't know much about them. And I would like to mention these two examples who wrote about Hadith. And you see that writing about Hadith, it pops up also here in the 20s and late 20s, early 20s and late 20s. And this is thanks to the two scholars, Mohamed Abdul Aziz Al-Khuli. He's a young Egyptian scholar of Hadith and orator at this time. We know things about him, but he contributed in that. And I think research about such people should be encouraged. I mean, just to know their contribution, because you see only their names, while they have just participated in the debate. Biographical information is lacking about them, and I think further research could build up or just like fill in a very important gap in the religious and intellectual debates of that time. The other one is a certain Abdul Rahman al-Jamjamuni, just habitual reader of Rida's journal from Egypt. This is the only thing we know about him, but he wrote really extensively about Hadith. So these kind of what you can call second-class writers, second class here in the historical meaning, not in the significance of their contributions. We know a lot about these big people, but I mean, just big writers in Al-Manar and other journals, but these less known people should be studied also as part and parcel of this historical development in Islamic and Arabic thinking. And I think by studying these people, thousands of other people could be discovered. Those people are almost buried in history, and we should uncover and discover them and their contribution to that. I will come to just a conclusion. We see here a few fluctuated topics in their occurrence over time, and which get also higher during specific times. We have made some historical explanations why. These historical patterns that coincide with digital results offer, I think, robust observations for a range of religious, political, and intellectual concerns of the Muslim reform over time during. We are lucky that actually we have Al-Manar as a corpus that have been studied, and we have really deep prior knowledge of Al-Manar as a corpus. And therefore, we could very easily understand and justify and make explanation about these high spikes, why the increase in that year and not in that year. And I think more studious research, more really extensive research should be done in other sources of which we have less knowledge as compared to Al-Manar. And I think distant reading uncovered new topics. We have seen this in the case of Hadith, and I think I admit, Emad, and I'm really converted now to digital humanities. It's really a valuable new tool for researching the history and contents of the Arabic press. And I think Talaat will enlighten us more about that in the following presentation.
you so much, Dr. Ryad. Does anyone have a question?
I have a question.
I think I, like Eid, will have questions about about the interesting talk Omar offered us and the insights into Al-Manar and Risala. I would let Eid ask first, and then I'll come up with my question.
My question is based on what Amr mentioned at the very end of his presentation, that your prior knowledge of Al-Manar is what makes you converted to digital humanities. So because you discovered something that you have been studying it for long, and now you discover that these tools will help you reach this result in just seconds. So my question is, what about if you don't have this prior knowledge of Al-Manar? What do you think? Also, we have other magazines included in this project that you might not be covering their corpus before, but we've started to discover a lot of things, and because of, I think your unique experience here is that you converted to this one based on your prior knowledge of Al-Manar, and you think now this is accurate. This is amazing. And I still remember this conversation between the three of us, me, you, and Emad, and how you when Emad came with results from Al-Manar, I was able to see this in your eyes. But what about the opposite? I don't have any expertise in this, but I think digital humanities is still doing an amazing job.
Yeah, thank you. I think I agree with you. I agree with you that there is a specific sense of sustainability, but knowledge confirms about the corpus itself. But I think it gives us a feeling that going into the direction to study others to get not the same results, but to put us in this critical thinking about other corpus. What I mean here, we have also discussion with Emad. I mean, just when we were trying to put available magazines together, Al-Muqtabas, Al-Manar, to put them together was for me very difficult because they are not represented for the Arabic thinking as a whole. So we cannot say we can study Al-Muqtabas, Al-Manar, this and that, and we say this is what the Arabic has claimed. I think we should study these corpses individually before we put them together in one case. Otherwise, you will get into a methodological problem from the close reading perspective. So here, our feeling, it confirms not the 100% reliability of the computational tools, but their use in that. So if you have, just this prior knowledge confirms it, but when you study others, it could confirm some of it. But I don't know. I have not tried this, but we have made some of the other exercises in Al-Muqtabas and others, and this needs really much more time in order to verify.
Just a follow-up question before I leave it to Talaat to continue with his questions. Right now, what you mentioned about Al-Manar is over 70% of it has been written by Racio-religious himself. What we thought of as is 73% written by Racio-religious, if we subject it to the digital tools, you might discover that the content itself, even if it's written by Racio-religious, but it's not Racio-religious. The other writers who had impact on Racio-religious and are reflected in his writings in Al-Manar. Could this lead us to look into Al-Manar as you said, a general body of writing, but to think of it as a combination of what Rashid Rida read and write about, and in this way it reflects a broader scene than what we thought of.
Yeah, I think the digital tools can be asking questions here, and I think Emad might jump in to help. One thing is actually we have worked with the corpus without cleaning it of any repetitions, because you will see that Rida is repeating some of his ideas or many of his ideas in different contexts. When he's writing the fatwa, when he's writing about, you know, a topic, political topic, religious topic, there are many content-wise ideas that are repeated all over the corpus. This is one thing. The second thing is, I think maybe, Emad, you may help me, the author attribution methods can be put into practice here in order to see, because Rida is not only dependent on modern scholars, he is also repeating ideas in a modern uniform, if I'm allowed to use this, from classical periods. I mean, just Ibn Taymiyyah. I mean, just when I looked at the results, I said, Emad, yeah, Ibn Taymiyyah as an author of Al-Manar, come. I mean, just this is something. It's just like citing him, writing. I mean, just quoting him, or just like, you know, publishing some of his fatwas or ideas. So I think the digital tools could help us in these two directions in order to sift out and refine the results in another direction. But I don't know, Emad, if you have anything to add.
Not, please, if you may ask your question.
Okay. I just wondering, Amr, if you have come upon any clues. I was searching for that about Rashid Rida, considering his Switzerland tour, his Paris tour, his conversations with the British ambassador in Egypt and in Turkey. Did you know any foreign language? Because I haven't seen any translations of him.
No, Rida didn't speak any foreign language. He knew some French, very, very little, and some Turkish because of his study in Syria. Very, very little. They could not help him to communicate. And I think if you look at Rida's sources of knowledge regarding the West, I think there are two main things. One is translation works, which were in the running. I mean, just the translation movement was very, very high and successful at this time. Therefore, he made use of these translation of Western works, and he made use of his own network. Think about Mohamed Tawfiq Sidqi, whom I have just mentioned. He was his main source regarding Christianity and medical and scientific discoveries. During his tour in Switzerland, his translator was Prince Shakib Arsalan, who had a good command of French and also could speak German and English a little bit, but his translator was the Ryad al-Sulh, Shakib Arsalan. So during that visit, he was totally dependent on his associates in the group.
I wonder how Sheikh al-Jisr didn't teach him some foreign languages, or guide him to learn it.
This is actually the problem that Rashid Rida, he admitted it, that he does not know except little French and little Turkish. So it's, yeah, I don't know. I don't have any explanation, but what I would say, if you have, for example, you have Rida was also teaching some of the British administrators Arabic. For example, you have what's his name, something Mitchell. He was an administrator in the finance department, and he was a friend of Abdu, and Abdu recommended him that Rida would teach him some Arabic and he would teach Rida some English, but I think it was not a successful enterprise.
That would indicate why Rida was some sort of a rigid reformer and not an open one who has.
I think you have to put it in another term, Talaat. I think, look, these reformers, including Abdu, in some cases, not all over the way, it's apologetic reformism.
I agree.
It's just like, you know, the idea of apologetic reformism, it has its own problems in the sense that you are always reactionary. They say, and I have to react, you know, and this is sometimes you have to understand. Another thing, Rida, at the end of the day, besides being a scholar, he was a journalist. And you know that, I mean, that when you are dealing with the journalism, you should react very quickly. And sometimes these quick reactions result in some inconsistency. And we have to divide Rida, in my perception, in three periods. The first period under the umbrella of Abdo, under the government of Abdo, Rida as an activist and being in secret societies such as the decentralization and against the Turks and etc. And Rashid Rida after the First World War, being also part and parcel of Abdulaziz Al Saud's network. So I think we should divide Ridas in three periods of his life.
Thank you so much, Amr.
So much,
Now
Dr.
to Sophia.
Presentation by Dr. Talaat Mohamed, who is an assistant professor of comparative literature and translation studies at Jouf University in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. At the school, and he is also an assistant professor at the School of Language and Translation at Al-Azhar University in Egypt. He holds a PhD in comparative post-colonial poetry and criticism, and MA in romantic poetry. Dr. Talaat's teaching and research fields are cross-cultural and interdisciplinary, involving the interplay of literature, culture, religion, and translation in post-colonial studies. He is currently conducting research on the modes of resistance in post-colonial poetry, comparative Arabic English literature, Arab Occidentalism, and literary translation. He has recently published works, including the co-authored articles Western Theory Meets Eastern Practice, Continuity, and the Amatory I'm not sure about this word, but
Preload.
Reloaded. Pre-Islamic, Early Islamic Poetry, Journal of Islamic and Muslim Studies, and the translation of Peter Mandibus' Transnational Muslim Politics. Dr. Talaat, if you may start, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Sophia, and thanks to Eid for putting this fabulous work together. Thanks to Emad, to a big salute for the digital mind for us, allowing such a big project to come to reality. And thanks to Amr, we'll have further conversations about Rida, of course, and future, inshallah. And thanks to Amr too for sparing me much effort about introducing the tool, introducing the way we process our material. I'll just have to introduce a quick word about what I think we are doing with topic modeling. So it's a tool for handling big data that is almost impossible to process in a conventional method. It involves, as Amr and Emad would say, segmenting text, revealing underlying cultural patterns, calculation of specific topic models, measurement of topic associations and irregularities or regularities, and capturing coherence values, all coupled with interpretation of balance, quality through close reading. That's what we are doing. So we leave the distant reading task to Ahmed, and we do the close readings. So the tool itself is used in identifying variables or features in social sciences models that we are working on. I consider it as a tool for amplified readings, deep browsing of data in quest for the general or umbrella patterns. As to how precise the tool is, I think it has its own limitations with the presence of endless variables in our research or cultural analytics research. We have manifest diversities involved in the process, especially when we address abstract ideas or nuanced terms like, say, colonialism, nationalism, racism, equality. I refer to these terms, some of these terms later, especially the word wataniya and qawmiya, and also jinsiyya, which are quite slippery to capture without close readings. So the process itself is quite intriguing to use, especially when we refer to topic modeling or any other NLP technique in social sciences. But still, as Amr said, we believe that through blending the empirical, the theoretical, through our analytical lens, such a tool can help in detecting the underlying patterns or collective frames surrounding the issues under discussion. At least it helps in giving us indications and thus sustaining specific anticipations of our future discussions of discourses, there's consequent realities on the ground. And here I would come to the surprise of regarding some of the results that are in line with one's close readings. And I asked Matthew Wickens about that. What are we doing here? Are we just sustaining main narratives, endorsing dominant discourses? And the idea was that even though in many cases the results of digital mining are in line with our own expectations, sometimes it comes in flat contradictions to what we are expecting in this result. So we can conclude that so far it's an optimum tool in addressing big data. Here we're speaking about thousands of articles, and put the statistical record earlier about that. During this process, and based on our hands-on experience, we come upon the following limitations. In particular, the process doesn't tell us how many topics we have in a certain corpus, and I would certainly, Emad, you can come upon that in the concluding remarks. It only refers to a list of words associated with each topic with a high probability, of course, based on our pre-assignment of key terms. There's also a need for sentiment analysis and structural topic modeling. I think Safiya is doing that, the sentiment analysis task for certain clusters, which are used in different contexts and tunes. Sometimes we have false negatives. Sometimes when we do 100 key mining, we don't come upon topics which are already there in the articles discussed. So again, how we proceed with that, the first point is to identify the corpus, list the lemmas, go through modeling, find out high frequency terms, the main collocates or associations. So the tool offers us a list of words associated with each topic with a high probability. We make a list of top words associated with each topic, knowing that the same word that's about recurrence, the same word may appear in multiple topics or carry more than one meaning. And the idea of different layers of meaning, there's a problematic issue here. The main discussion for my and article goes around the following threads: the religious, the cultural, the spatial territorial, the anti-colonial, anti-monarchic. Of course, we have different narratives here. The anti-colonial narrative, because we were in a pre-war, interwar, post-war period, and the Arab world was struck with colonial power struggle, and that's why anti-colonialism is a main narrative throughout the two journals, not only Al-Manar but also Al-Risala. So we come upon views of the other between inverted commas. We have the Americans, the European. The Europeans do not include the Americans, of course, during that context. The Americans, the Europeans, the Africans, the Japanese, the Chinese, Southeast Asia in general, India. We have also come upon threads discussing alienation or inclusion of racial categories. We have the Jews, the Zionists, and of course, predominantly the Christians and the Copts, since our case study revolves around Egypt. Another thread is the idea of othering of heterodox or nonconformists. We have a battle, a constant battle that interestingly is still present in Egypt up to the moment between the Islamists, the liberals, the seculars. This is a big battle here. We also look into the distribution of such top wars and read the texts themselves to see the surfacing topics cohere into something meaningful, or as Amr said, the overarching themes or narratives. We study the topics associated with metadata, answer descriptive questions, find different ideologies, talk about the main narratives during the mid and later 19th century. I see that Safiya turn to the second slide. Okay, why Rida and Azayat in particular? I just put brief glimpses into the characters themselves. As Amr said, Rashid Rida is a religious reformer in the first instance, and here we would consider him as a journalist in the first instance. I would quote the Jewish journalist Yaqub Sarwar describing him as a John Calvin or Martin Luther of Islam, and that's highly interesting in this regard. The word Al-Manar itself means beacon, means lighthouse, and that's what Rida himself was trying to do, to establish a lighthouse for the whole Ummah. And Ummah here differs from the word nation in a very liberal sense, which would be used, and that would be the twist in Azayat's magazine. Another mentor of Rida was, of course, Al-Afghani, not only Mohamed Abdu. And I find Al-Manar largely going through the main line engaged by Al-Urwa Al-Wuthqa, of course, a joint collaboration of Al-Afghani and Abdu. Again, I would refer to the New York Times mourning of Rashid Rida when he dies. When he died, the words literally said, Rashid Rida dies, a Muslim scholar, historian, editor, who exerted much influence on all classes of thinkers. Now we have Rashid Rida as an intellectual, and this is the same role played by Ahmed Hassan Az-Zayat himself. Now to the next slide, please, Safiya. Al-Risala itself is considered as a chronicle of pre-modern Arabic literature. And the word modern would intertwine with the word Nahda itself, which is still a controversial term, but we would come upon that later. So unlike Al-Manar itself, Al-Risala's mission was largely to promote anti-colonial pan-Arab nationalism with a shift from Rida's religious stream to the cultural and intellectual stream. So Azayat himself was taught at Al-Azhar, so he was exposed to religious education, just like Rida himself, though in a different or through different methodologies. He revitalized Arabic literary and cultural life through his writings and translation, and in this he differs from Rida because he was exposed to French and English, but French mainly. For us, we would consider Ahmed Hassan Az-Zayat as the Arab Ghota before, because the most famous work he translated was Ghota's The Sorrows of Young Werther. Now let's move. I'll try to skip some information. What I'm doing here, Aid and I are trying to approach the two journals together as engaging and continued. That's the continuum we are talking about. We're not discussing every journal specifically or separately. We're bringing them together, yoking them together through a main narrative, a dominant narrative. And here comes the benefit of digital mining or distant reading. So we have the two journals engaging a continued discourse on Arabo-Islamic Egyptian identity in particular, despite the shifts in orientation and interests. We are speaking about a religious reformer and a literature. So the scope of the paper would be the multifaceted identity discourse as represented in the journal, in the two journals, through the religious, the racial, the cultural debates engaged. The key identity markers largely shaped and are also shaped by the prevalent nationalist narratives in Egypt and the Arab world during the lifespan of the two journals. We are speaking about half a century of journalistic publication. And of course, since language itself is a key constituent in the racial and cultural discourse on Arab, Christian, Coptic, Jewish relations, topic modeling helps us in tracing the main associations or collocates surrounding the topic and settling its conceptual molding. This first slide you're seeing right now, these are the main threads sustaining the identity discourse, including I'm trying to translate. I know you're all acquainted with Arabic, but I'll try to give it in English. the cultural, the linguistic, the historical, the socio-religious, the socio-political, the international, the racial, and above all, of course, the anti-colonial, given that the rhetoric of Egyptian Arab independence during that time runs deep through almost all the respective articles discussed. So the two other key terms that feature prominently here are the word watan, homeland, but specifically when we say watani, and I'll go to Emad for that, because sometimes we drop the attributive yeah, the yeah in nasab. When we shift from watan, which is homeland, and we say watani, we don't mean only one belonging to a certain homeland. We mean patriotic. Sometimes we mean the word national, which is qawmi. And another term is jins. Jins indicated in race, gender, citizenship. And with the attributive the yeah in nasab, we have different layers of meaning, which we need to come to close reading to identify the specific meaning intended in the articles. So the slide itself, let's move to the next slide, please, Sophia. These are the topics, almost all the topics discussed in Al-Manar. I'll start with Al-Manar. And these are the head topics or head themes in the journal, colored in red. I try to identify the confluence of the different discussions in Al-Manar. Each topic, of course, is given a numerical value. We have the head themes here, 15, 11, 40. Of course, this is tricky, but I'll come to that later. It will be clear in a minute. So as we can guess, Al-Manar's primary objective is to induce religious and intellectual reform, but primarily religious reform. And since Rida himself was, at least initially, a firm advocate of the pro-Ottoman, I would argue with a little bit with Amr in this regard. He turned allegations from a pro-Ottoman caliphate as an optimum system of governance to let's say, pro-Arab caliphate, pro-Syrian for a while. This reform would come through Rida's platform, of course, Al-Manar. Let's see. May we turn to the next slide, please? Okay, trying to find the head themes discussed in Al-Manar, and as you see, Amr spared me the idea of explaining why certain spikes exist, because whenever there is a spike, it co-occurs with something going on the ground. It parallels some great incident taking shape on the ground. So this first cluster of topics addresses exegesis, Islam, conclusive evidence that's Qatari, Salafi, which is a key term associating with Rida, of course, throughout his journey. Now we don't see the Jews. We have only Christians, Muslims. We have political argumentation. We have the Turks, but no Jews, who are a main constituent of the racial discourse in Al-Manar. Let's move to the second slide, please, Sophia. When we expand the focus, the clusters address a sort of interfaith dialogue or debate or polemics, which at a certain attention-ridden juncture rise to the level of heated polemics, as I said. So we have a dominant cluster, Christo-Islamic encounter, mostly revolving around the Christian doctrine of Trinity, as opposed, of course, to Islamic monotheism. And interestingly, the different narratives here run consistently, rising and dropping concurrently. You can see it, all the colors rising and dropping consistently. And this is highly indicative because it's not the case with Azayat's journal. Let's move to the third cluster. When we cover I'll try to compare the Christo-Islamic, the Judeo-Islamic. Not this slide, please, Safiya. Slide number 8. Page number 8, that's it. Thank you. When comparing the Christo-Islamic and Judeo-Islamic, the mention of the Jews is less frequent and still with the religious trope being more frequent than the political. So the political involves the territorial sense. Here we mention Palestine, Maghreb, and Maghreb here refers to the Arab Maghreb in general. We have Algeria, Tunisia, and Morocco. We also have France, international and colonial dimension. We have the Berber, racial marker. We have Jerusalem. We have homeland, Algeria, land, and world. This is broad scope for the discussion of the Palestinian question. Here, you may find out that the religious sense dwindles in favor of the political, which is interesting, given the main dominant or the dominant narratives in the journal itself. So let's move quickly to the next cluster. That's the dominant narratives here. Pan-Islamic nationalism. So we always argue that Al-Manar advocated a sort of pan-Islamic nationalism, first pro-Ottoman, then pro-Arab, depending on the geopolitical developments on the ground, given that it was a period of dizzying upheavals, including the Balkan Wars, the fall of the Ottoman Empire, British, French, and Italian occupation of almost all Africa and parts of the Arabian Peninsula. And we have Germany as an active player, of course, first as an ally of the Turkish Empire, and then as a foe under Hitler, of course. And so regarding this national thread, the political discussions in the journal assume an international dimension, given that Rida himself was deeply involved in the political negotiations of the time, pushing, of course, for an Arab independence, first under an Ottoman sovereignty, either actual or nominal. He called it ruhiyya, zamaniya, political, or ruhiyya, spiritual. He would accept the nominal dominance of the Ottoman Empire. He said about himself that he is a Hamidi in inclination, in religious and political inclination. So before shifting, of course, allegiance to the British Empire in the hope of winning support for an Arab independence under a government seated in the Arabian Peninsula. And here I would ask Amr about that. You notice that when Rida was disappointed with the Puritanism of the Turkish young Turks group, he quickly moved to the British embassy in Turkey. When he was still in Turkey, he moved to the British embassy, engaging in negotiations about how to win Arab independence, how to win their favor or support for an Arab independence, and that was interesting. That was immediate shift from pan-Ottomanism to pan-Arabism under a British sovereignty. Again, here we notice that Egypt is mentioned, yet it was not pivotal in Rida's negotiation for independence, knowing that his model for an Arab state would refer to the Arabian Peninsula, the site of the holy shrines or the sacred sanctuaries of Islam. So the cluster of Egypt involves the term jins, race, and its variant jinsi, racial, with the discussion of within the discussion of the Ottoman-Arab relation. We also understand the tension associating the rise of the Young Turks, a Puritan movement in Turkey, its Turkization of the empire, something which was unacceptable for Rida himself. And for this movement, it constituted a threat to the Arab language, the Arabic language itself, as the language of the Quran, as described by Rida, and a key marker of the Arabo-Islamic identity. Am I running through my time, Safiya? Because I still have a lot to introduce. I'll shift to cluster, not cluster, let's say slide 11. Let's move to the head themes in Al-Risala. Now we shift from pan-Islamism to pan-Arabism, or pan-Islamic Arabism, of course. Slide 11, please. Now with Al-Zayat himself, we witnessed the shift from pan-Ottomanism to pan-Arab Islamism and then pan-Islamic Arabism with Egypt, unlike the case in Al-Manar, with Egypt at the heart of the Arab identity discourse. Here the shift from the word nation in the sense of an ummah goes to the word nation in an Arabized sense, not an Islamized sense. But still with an Islamic tinge because given, of course, the background of Ahmed Hassan al-Zayat himself, but still within a modern sense of the term. Interestingly, al-Zayat himself was less tolerant. When we compare both, we have Rashid Rida, the religious reformer, we have al-Zayat as a liberal reformer. Then we discover, against our expectations, that Rashid Rida, who was a religious reformer, was more tolerant in his racial argumentation than Zayat himself. He was less tolerant than Rida, the Salafi, who is called Salafi. In this sense, and of course, in addressing the Zionist question, Rashid Rida played the liberal role, while Ahmed Hassan al-Zayat was the rigid reformer or the Salafi in the broad sense of the term. I remember Zayat, for example, calling the Zionists, considering them the parasites and the pernicious disease planted by colonialism at the heart of the nation itself. And this is quite understandable, given the role played by the Zionists in establishing their home in occupied Palestine, of course. Now the Unitarian sense of the Ummah is still Arab in Zayat's discourse, though without excluding the dimension of the Islamic and the Eastern term sense of the word in general. Still, the core of the discussion turns to Egypt, which for Zayat is a microcosm of the great or greater Arab Ummah. So again, like Rida, Zayat himself sought to wed the sublime cultural legacy of the Arabs and Muslims, or of the East in general, specific culture of the East within a hybrid and cosmopolitan paradigm at the heart of the Egyptian nation. Of course, he had a liberal and secular inclinations more than Rida himself. So he sought to integrate Western cultures into Arabic, bring together, I would find within the same article, I would find Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, Farabi, Ibn Sina, Greek philosophy, Islamic Sufism, Egyptian and Greek mythology, all through translation, because Zayat himself was a translator in the first instance, and with language playing a major role in the process. I remember that we have a constant column in the journal called أثر الثقافة العربية في اللغات الأخرى, and another, the impact of Arabic, أثر اللغة العربية first, the impact of Arabic language on other languages, and أثر الثقافة العربية in general on other culture. I would now shift to the results quickly. Now we come to the conclusion that both Rida and the Zayat assumed an all-inclusive hybrid discourse, and this is how we approach the two overarching themes in the two journals that transcend the then dilemmatic binaries in religion, culture, politics. Rida, for example, didn't follow a specific school of jurisprudence. He was rather, I'm quoting Lior Halevi, of course, in Modern Things on Trial, he was eclectic in his laissez-faire Salafism. Likewise, Zayat himself was a proponent of multiculturalism and literary syncretism, especially through his translations of English, French, canonical works of literature into Arabic. It should be noted here that the two journals, much like the Nahda project in the Arab world, were individual initiatives. They stopped with the passing, of course, with the exception of Al-Manar itself being published for 4 or 5 years by Hassan al-Banna himself after the passing of Sheikh Rashid Rida. Both projects ended with the passing of their owners. Even Zayat himself had to suspend the publication of the magazine for about 10 years. So here springs the felicity of revitalizing the legacy to the current project. The two men, Rida and Zayed, dreamed of an Arabo-Islamic world, united under a main umbrella. For Rida, this umbrella was an Ottoman caliphate for a while. Then, after the rise of radical and purist movements, it turned from pan-Turanism, pan-Turkism. We have an Islamism project given sort of pan-Islamist Arabism. Yeah. But interestingly, Rida's Arabism or pan-Islamism was itself a nativist version of Islam in face of a then rising. We have in Egypt rising Pharaonic and Coptic nationalisms at the time. After all, we're discussing the liberal project of the Nahda, right, as having its seeds in that moment of the 19th century journalism. And with that, I would conclude my presentation. And sorry for keeping it long, and thanks for your patience.
Thank you, Dr. Talaat. We mute ourselves here so we don't create reverb.
Thank you very much.
We did not mess up with your PowerPoint. Now the floor is open for any questions, virtual or anyone in the room. No questions?
Maybe Talaat want to.
Of course, it's a pleasure.
Do we have room for that?
I'm having an echo. I'm having a problem getting your voice.
Yeah, I'll mute us from here.
Yes, please, Talaat. I mean, you had some questions or points for debating the issue of Al-Manar. So please, we can start. I mean, just like, you have raised the idea of Judaism, why Judaism is less prominent in Al-Manar quantitatively. And also regarding Rida's ideas of an Arab caliphate, and if I remember it correctly, his, coming close to the British on the expense of the Ottoman caliphate.
Yeah, that's true.
I think if you dig in the archives of Rashid Rida, you can find interesting explanations. Rida was a political activist, so it's for him the question of looking for, just what he saw as solutions for the Arab independence. We have to understand, even before the fall of the Caliphate, Rashid Rida believed in an Arab Caliphate, because he called the Ottoman Caliphate, although he was an Ottomanist in his early years, after the Young Turks came to power, he changed his strategy, calling for an Arab independence in the Ottoman Empire. He did not mean to erase the Ottoman Empire, but for him to decentralize Arab provinces. And for him, at a certain moment, there should be an Arab caliphate. The central of the headquarters should be Mecca. The administration should be Damascus and Cairo. This was for him actually his imagination, his imagined caliphate. He called the Turkish caliphate Khilafatul Darura, the caliphate of necessity. The Turks are brave. They are the germ of Islam, but the Arabs are the genuine representatives of Islam. So this is one. So therefore, he was shifting loyalties, especially after his frustration in 1912, when the Young Turks frustrated him by not financing Dar al-Da'wa wal-Irshad. And having this strategy of translating the Quran into Turkish, he was annoyed by somebody like George Zaidan, because he was involved in this translation and this idea of Turkism. So regarding the British, and this is very, very interesting, Rida was bidding on them. But after the war, he was again frustrated because he thought that the British paid the Arabs just lip services. They did not. And I did a small research about the jihad debate. If you remember the jihad debate in the German Ottoman alliances.
Of course.
I was surprised that Rashid Rida was muted about it. He did not take part in that debate. His ideas about the First World War is very, very fascinating because he is pro-British, but at the same time very, very careful to express his views about the Ottomans. And later after the war, he would call this Turkish-German alliance was the doom of the Arab fate. So this is actually in order just to understand his strategies, especially also in his diaries. His diaries are very illuminating because he is mentioning things that is not mentioned in Al-Manar regarding his meeting in the Arab Bureau in Cairo, meeting with British administrations, all these secret meetings, etc., etc. So this is regarding this point. Regarding Judaism, I think we could look into Zionism because Zionism is very prominent. I have just finished a paper which has been accepted for publication about Ryad's ideas from the Dreyfus affairs in France against the Jews till Zionism in Palestine. And here you see that he is discussing Zionism and the expansion of Zionism. In the beginning, he was very positive about Zionist movements and that they should invest in the Holy Lands and collaborate with the Arabs. And later on, he changed his mind about that, as you know. But I think if you make just a curve of his study of Judaism coupled with Zionism and also the Christian West, because it was a colonial project at the end of the day, the British support of them, etc., etc. So I think in that direction, you could just like, not from a quantitative point of view, but from a qualitative point of view again, because it could be just, you know, maybe 10, 20 articles about that, but they're very influential in the whole thinking about Judaism and Zionism. The last thing.
You know, Amran, sorry for interruption here. It's quite interesting. Out of Rida and out of Hizb al-Nur today, the Salafi movement, this is some sort of opportunism. Quick shifting of allegiances according to the political circumstances.
Yeah, he's
I
a
know
politician.
this is acceptable as a politician, of course, but as an intellectual, as a reformer, it's hard to shift allegiances during a short span of time. And I understand, of course, that he was engaged in the negotiations for independence of the Arabo-Islamic world and an anti-colonial movement at the time in the general sense.
No, I agree with you. Okay, look, if you look at Ryad's ideas from the very beginning and a few years later in his fatwas or ideas, he changed it completely. I mean, he's shifting even in his ideas, in his things. But this is something, I mean, just like, you know, you're right. I mean, just what should be critically studied in this way. And the third point, I don't know. But I'm done. If there is no anything else, I would like to leave the room to the space to others too.
Thank you very much.
Now we have our final session in this conference. We still have like the closing remarks, which is about the platform, etc. But for the presentation, this will be the last one. And we have in this panel Dr. Raheem, Sarwar, who is a lecturer in Wolverhampton. And we have also Javier Alonso, who is a PhD candidate at Georgia State University. We'll start with Dr. Raheem. As I said, is a lecturer in natural language processing at Research Group in Computational Linguistics, Research Institute in Information and Language Processing at the University of Wolverhampton, UK. He earned his PhD from the City University of Hong Kong. His research interests lie within the areas of natural language processing, data science, science-to-metric, alphametric, information retrieval, and text mining. He has published research articles in reputed international journals and conference proceedings such as Information Science, Knowledge-Based System, Science-to-Metric, ICDM, ACL, and EMNLB. He has more than 4 years of teaching experience at different universities in the world, including the City University of Hong Kong, Information Technology University, VIST, and the University of Wolverhampton in UK. Mr. Raheem will present today on author verification of Nahj al-Balagha. Please go ahead, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much for the introduction. So without further ado, I'll just get started. So, the presentation title is Author Verification of Nahj al-Balagha. So, Nahj al-Balagha basically is a book, and this investigation was performed by me and one of my colleague, Emad Mohamed, who works in RGCL UK as well. So I will go to the next slide to talk about the background of this investigation. So as I mentioned that Nahj al-Balagha is a book that has always been a source of contention between two sects of Muslims known as Sunnis and Shias. So there are two different theories regarding this book. And the first theory comes from the Shia Muslim, which believes that the Nahj al-Balagha was authored by Imam Ali, and the second theory is coming from the Sunni Muslim scholars who claims that the book was either written by two brothers, Sharif al-Radi or Sharif al-Murtada. So there is a book, and there are two group of people. They have different theories, and we try to find out who were actually the true authors of this book based on these theories. So when we tried to investigate this fact, we were wondering if we could use stylometry to perform this task. So what is stylometry? Basically, stylometry is a field of study which investigates the writing styles of people. So based on this area of study, researchers believe that every person has a unique writing style, and based on that, we can differentiate between the documents which are written by different authors. So some of the researchers, they believe that every person, they have stored a specific set of vocabulary in their minds over the period of time, and this set of vocabulary may differ slightly or significantly from the rest of the people. Not only that, but the way every person chooses the vocabulary to form sentences could also be different from the rest of the people. So we look at these kind of linguistic cues from the documents to see who is the actual author of a anonymous book or novel or a document. So that is a brief introduction of the stylometry and the problem that we were trying to investigate. So I will go to the next slide to talk about two questions that we formulated. So the first question was, were the several passages in the book of Nahj al-Balagha produced by the same person? So it is also known as internal consistency of the book. So if the book is internally consistent in terms of writing style, it means that the book is written by one single person. If the book is not internally consistent, then it means that the book is not written by one person. So the second question that we formulated was, were the passages in the book of Nahj al-Balagha authored by al-Radi or al-Murtada? So the reason for this question was that it was possible for us to get the true writing samples of al-Radi and al-Murtada. So if we have the true writing samples of al-Radi and al-Murtada, so we can compare these true writing samples of these two people against Nahj al-Balagha to see whether one of them or two of them were the author of Nahj al-Balagha or not. So if we could answer these two questions, then we pretty much solve the mystery that who was the actual author of this book. So I will go to this slide to see to summarize our contribution. So we obtained Nahj al-Balagha and collected true writing samples of al-Sharif and al-Murtada. So we then partitioned the text sample into equal sized chunks and extracted stylometric features. The main reason to partition the text samples into the equal sized chunks is that we wanted to see the internal consistency. And after we partition it, we extract stylometric features, and I will talk about them in detail in next couple of slides. But in short, we used most frequent words and most frequent function words as the stylometric features to perform this task. So once we extracted these stylometric features from the text samples, we then conducted two sets of experiments. The first set of experiments were conducted using machine learning algorithms in supervised fashion. And we specifically, we used 5-fold cross-validation to conduct these experiments. And the second set of experiments were unsupervised, using unsupervised approaches. And we also call them clustering analysis. So I'm going to talk about all of them one by one in the next couple of slides. So the first thing is data collection. So I will briefly talk about how we collected the data and which data we collected. So as for the book of Nahj al-Balagha, we used the version edited by Sheikh Faris Hussein. And as for the true writing samples of al-Sharif already, we collected his book called Al-Majazat al-Nabwiyya, and its English name is Prophetic Metaphors. And as for al-Sharif al-Murtada, we use the book, The Epistles of Sharif Murtada, and the book expounds Sharif Murtada's opinion on a number of legal and theological questions and has a very few quotations. So this is the data that we use to conduct this investigation. So in the next slide, I will talk about our methodology. So basically, our methodology has 3 simple steps. The first step is pre-processing, and the second step is extracting authorial features or stylometric features from the text samples. And the third step is to apply supervised and unsupervised approaches on our feature sets. So let's talk about each of them one by one. So in the pre-processing step, what we try to do is we try to make our text suitable for processing. So we clean the data to make it basically more amenable to analysis, such as removing punctuations, footnotes, and quotations. So as for the quotations, we remove them through punctuational and the linguistic cues. So the motivation to remove footnote was that they were mostly by the editors who were trying to explain the unfamiliar words to the modern readers. So we had to remove them as well. And in order to illustrate how important it is to perform the pre-processing, I have put up an example here. So, for example, the book Al-Majazat al-Nabwiyya by Sharif already contained 97,349 words. So removing the footnotes brought the number down to 55,747 words, and removing quotes further reduced it to around 15,000 words. So the pre-processing has a significant effect on the experimental results that we have, and it is very important step to perform authorship attribution related studies. So in the next slide, I will just briefly talk about the features that we used. So we used basically 2 types of features. The first one is the n most frequent words. So the value of n was fixed to 100, but we try to change it to see its effect on accuracy as well. But for most of the experiments, the value of n was set to 100 because it resulted in the best accuracy. So the use of n most frequent verbs for authorship analysis is a well-tested approach, but there is a slight effect of genre or theme on the accuracy. So that's why we decided to use another type of features as well, which is known as function words. So there are several motivations behind using the function words for this kind of analysis. For example, all the authors, they use they are available with the same set of function words, so they are easily comparable. So there's always enough of them due to their high frequency, so we don't run into the frequency issues as well. So they are less affected by the genre or theme of the text, so which means that we don't really have to do controlled experiments where the topic of each document is the same, and then they are not under the conscious control of author as are the lexical words. So these are some of the motivations behind using the function word. So as for the supervised approaches, we applied these supervised approaches, and the reason was that they have been applied extensively to conduct these kind of analysis. So we use naive Bayes, sport vector machines, k-nearest neighbors, Decision trees, random forest, ADA boost, and bagging. So they have been used extensively in the literature, and we wanted to see how they can be used to solve this particular task. So these are the supervised approaches, and in the next slide I have basically explained the unsupervised approaches that we have used in our investigation, and they include hierarchical clustering principle, component analysis, multi-dimensional scaling, and bootstrap consensus trees. So these were the four main types of unsupervised learning methods that we applied on our data. So now it's time to talk about our experimental results. So first, I'm going to talk about the supervised approaches using most frequent verbs as the features. So as you can see in this table, we use three different types of evaluation measures known as precision, recall, and F-scores. We can see that we have pretty high accuracy for SVM and for KNN, random forest, and ADA boost. So these numbers tells us two things. The first thing is that there is an internal consistency within the book because each particular chunk is being attributed to the original author. That's why the accuracy is higher. And the second thing that is being revealed by these numbers is that the book is basically not written by the Sharif al-Radi or Sharif al-Murtada. So these numbers are obtained using the supervised approaches, and where the function word, where the most frequent words were used as the features, and there were only 100 most frequent words. So in the next slide, we performed some analysis based on unsupervised methods, and there were 4 of them as I discussed earlier. So what they do is that they try to cluster the chunks of different books that we have. So they try to make clusters. So when we apply these methods on our data set, we end up having 3 different clusters which are clearly visible, and they show that these 3 books are not written by the same person. They are written by different people because they are 3 different clusters and they are far away from each other. And it also answers our other question, which is whether Sharif al-Radi or Sharif al-Murtada was one of the author of the Nahj al-Balagha. So these experimental results that you can see on your screen, they are obtained using the most frequent words as features. So in the next slide, we have the same kind of analysis, but here the features were basically the function words. So in this particular slide, which you can see on your screen, we try to see the effect of number of features. As I mentioned earlier, that we were using only 100 most frequent words as the features, but people may think, what will happen if you use 50 words as features, or you use 150 words, or you use 200 words as features, and how much effect it may have on the accuracy of the whole task. So we try to vary the number of features from 50 to 200, and we found that 100 features resulted in the best accuracy, as you can see in this slide. So that was the reason to use 100 most frequent words as features in the rest of the experiments that we performed. So in the next slide, we also try to see the effect of chunk size, because when we partition a book into different chunks, we set the default size to 3000 tokens. Token is anything which is separated by white space. So, but we were also a bit curious to know how it will affect the accuracy when the size of the chunk is lower or higher than 3000. But we found that the 3000 was the appropriate value to use as a chunk size, and that was the reason that for the rest of the experiments that we conducted, the chunk size was set to 3000 tokens. So in next slide, I just have concluded this investigation. Nahj al-Balagha is a controversial book, as I mentioned, and Sunnis and Shias, they have different type of theories about it. So our computational analysis shows three things. The first is the book is internally consistent and can thus be safely attributed to only one person. The second is that it was not authored by Sharif Ravi. And third is that it was not authored by Sharif al-Murtada. So that are the concluding. And that's all today. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them.
Thanks, Dr. Raheem. And now we have any questions, whether from our virtual audience or from the audience in the room.
I think Talaat has
Much. Talaat, did you raise your hand?
No, it's only a thank you note, Raheem. Thank you so much for this interesting
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And maybe if we get any questions, we can do it after the second presentation by Mr. Javier Guirado Alonso. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, who is a PhD student at Georgia State University. He also holds a master's degree in Arab and Islamic studies by the Autonomous University of Madrid. His research focuses on politics, informal institutions, and the use of private and public spaces in the Gulf, particularly in the cases of Qatar and Oman. During the 2020, he was a guest researcher at the Dutch Image Institute in Cairo. And his paper today is about Khaleeji modernities, private spaces, British imperialism, and the centralization of the Qatari peninsula. Please go ahead. If you want to share a presentation, maybe you are the presenter right now.
Yeah, I don't have it.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
Yeah, sorry, I don't have a presentation as such. I have a document that I will share with you in a minute, but first I want to frame the whole project a little bit more to put it in place with the whole framework that it works with. Can everyone hear me, by the way? Well, just let me know.
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Great, perfect. So this project is it kind of intersects with my dissertation project, but it is also a complete different project on its own. My research has to do with Qatar in the 50s and the 1960s specifically, but this project is more focused. I guess the main idea of the project is to connect from the 19th century, 20th century to the 21st century, social and political institutions in Qatar more specifically, but in the Gulf more in general, from the domestic space to social and political institutions in general. I guess the specific places that I will be looking at in this presentation and in the paper that I submitted were the Majlis as a quasi-domestic institution that also has to do with politics and social relations, and particularly in the Gulf, but not only in the Gulf, and ultimately to municipal elections in Qatar in 2015. The data is not updated to the recent elections that were held. This is for a number of reasons. One of them is time. The second one is because the project, which included other people at Georgia State, was discontinued because of COVID-19. I guess as many other projects in other parts of the world, in other universities and places. So I'm going to take the opportunity of this Congress to kind of get back to it and see if I am able, or other people are able to get back to it and fully make it, flesh it out and see all the nuances that we can find here. So in terms of digital humanities, the idea of this project is to be able to map the relations, the connections and disconnections between these what some people call informal institutions. Douglas North specifically will call these informal institutions, like the majlis meetings that are held in tribal councils and so on in the Gulf, and actual formal institutions that emerged particularly after the 1960s and 1970s, and more specifically after independence in 1971. Such as, again, municipal elections, municipal constituencies, more specifically, not just the elections, but how they work in terms of also internal issues, from, again, voting to fixing a water pipe for the district. And again, the connection between these two ideas draws on the theoretical frameworks that people like Henri Lefebvre have made a connection about, making an explicit connection between space and social relations and how they actually co-create each other. Not that social relations define a space, and not that a space defines social relations, but actually that both co-create one another. To have some background about how the Majlis system, so to speak, has been used in other works, there's the classic work by already classic, I guess, by Abdul Razak Takriti about Oman in the 1960s and 1950s, monsoon revolution, and he made one of his claims was that the British Empire was using the tribal system that was in place, particularly in the south of the country, to leverage their control of not just the population, but the whole Sultanate, at the time, Sultanate of Muscat and Imamate of Oman, separated at the time. This made me question whether this project could also be an interesting way to question, to, in a way, exceptionalize, but also de-exceptionalize all these tribal and social and political and social institutions that people always refer to when talking about the Gulf, and also to kind of break, or at least think through or think go beyond this usually simplistic binarism between what is traditional and what is modern. What actually happens is that when we look at the sources, these two ideas do not really play out in a very in such a fixed way as sometimes we talk about them. And what I'm meaning with this is that the classic narrative would be to put the idea of the Majlis as a traditional institution that's only a part of the Gulf and part of the essence of social political institutions in the Gulf, whereas the modern bureaucratic state that is now in place in the countries in the Gulf is the modern idea. What we see when we look at the sources is that those two things are very much connected throughout history. So following up on these ideas that Khaleeji mentions in the case of Oman, I first looked at the definitions of what a Majlis is. It's usually defined, but Shuraidi defines it as a tribal council or council of tribes, a gathering of a select group of people in the presence of a leading notable, a religious dignitary, or well-known poet, and as an institution set up to deal with matters pertaining to the public interest or domain. This is a general definition that can be that can apply to pretty much any context where a Majlis happens. But if we look more specifically into the Gulf, people like Michael Herb, who also works at Georgia State, distinguishes between or defines it explicitly as, and I quote, an informal social gathering of men, often held weekly in a special room built for the purpose. And he also mentions that in Kuwait, this is called a diwaniyah. I guess the main idea of all these definitions is that bringing together the definition and this relation with British colonialism made me think about what British colonial sources would say about the idea of the Majlis and how that has ultimately played out in the building and the state building of institutions in Qatar and there was going to be some fieldwork recorded in Ras Al Khaimah, but this has been cancelled for COVID reasons. So again, I'm focusing only in the case of Qatar here. Ultimately, what the British colonial sources, I was starting to pay attention to the Gazetteer of the Persian Gulf by Lorimer, and he mentions the Majalis multiple times throughout the volumes of the compilation. It is interesting that he's most, I guess the Gazetteer has two parts mostly. One is mostly focused on the relations between the British and the Gulf, and the other one is more kind of an anthropological guide for all the colonial agents that were about to get there. And it's interesting to see how in the first volume he mostly focuses when regarding the Majlis as in how that will benefit the interest of the British Empire. He mentions, or the way he defines and describes the multiple Majalis that he mentions is regarding how that will benefit as sort of to set up differences and disputes regarding taxes and mercantile disputes with, again, British interest, talking about goods as different from barrels to dates to other British goods that were important in the Gulf. And again, it's always depicted as kind of a chaotic mechanism. That's how Lorimer describes it, but that ultimately benefits the interest of the British because they have a more more set, so to speak, administrative structure that ultimately made them benefit from the Majlis system. In the second book, nevertheless, or the second volume, better say, he talks about the Majlis in a different way. He refers to it more as an institution separated from British interests and almost falling in this kind of Orientalist narrative of the desert democracy, not really getting into the nuances of how that works and how it plays out within the whole socio-political structure. So that would be the background, let's say the framing of the connection between the domestic spaces and the other spaces. And what I'm going to do now, I'm going to show you, I'm going to copy the link to the chat box, and I'm going to share my screen as well. The actual GIS project, or at least one of them. I'm speaking now from a Mac, and well, ArcGIS only works on personal computers, so I won't be able to share with you all the maps that we have working on, comparing all the municipal constituencies and all that. But I'm going to go real quick over this one. Which I hope everyone can see my screen right now. This one has, it's not so much GIS to explain the connections, but more so GIS as a pedagogical way to explain what we were working on. So this is kind of the title that we were using for this project, and we're trying to kind of bridge the gap between this domestic spaces and domestic or institutions that relate to a different socio-political structure to that of the municipal constituency with those actual elections. First, there's a little bit of context that puts Doha in the map for students or of the audience of the map. And the research question for this story map or storyboard here is if do tribes still matter if we look at them from my electoral perspective. There's been a lot of work done about this, particularly in Kuwait, because there's a longer tradition of tribal and electoral relations. But there's also interesting stuff to flesh out in the case of Qatar. Again, the maps I'll be using here are mostly drawn from the Qatar Digital Library, so yet another example of digital humanities, I guess. Historically speaking, we start here in the 1950s with the evolution of the city itself, the urban development of the city after the start of the oil boom in the 1950s. This is a map of Qatar in the 1940s, made by, again, the British, and we can see how Doha looked completely different, pretty much the center of the city right now. Al-Bida and Doha. By 1952, with the oil boom and the area of Said and Dukhan and all that part of Qatar, we start to see some development, and I have kind of layered a map of the 1950s with a map of the current, or well, actually 2015 municipal constituencies. It's an interactive map. We can see the name of the current constitution, how they roughly, or not even roughly, they pretty much go along with the current districts, and how again the tribal areas that were mostly having or would have residents from one specific tribe would now become municipal constituencies. Again, 1950s, the city starts to grow as a result of oil revenues, and by 1959, this growth had led to an incredible growth in comparison to the other two maps that I was showing. We have an incredible expansion of the city. We have some of these highlighted, Salata being one of the main areas of the city that was being expanded, but we have others as well, to the south, to the east, to the west, everywhere. It also shows the displacement of the city center, which I guess would need further research to see how that relates to tribal dynamics or not, but also how the city starts to incorporate neighboring settlements that were not necessarily part of the conurbation of tribal settlements that were at the time. Again, we see how this development led to the expansion of some areas towards the sea. And here we have a map with, this is Doha today, and the highlighted area is what would correspond to this previous map that we had in the late 1950s and early 1960s. We have the airport, we have, again, Doha as such, the old Doha, and we have the also the census municipalities in Qatar overlapped to see how this has evolved. The interesting part here is that Doha not only evolved by itself, but it also incorporated peoples and Qabila from different parts of the Qatari peninsula. And again, there's some researchers I quote here in all our history that explain how precisely migration to Doha from other parts of the Qatari peninsula and getting into a more what some anthropologists call the hadar lifestyle led to an increased tribal relationship within the tribe itself. And there's an oral history that I referred to here that precisely claims that there was an increased tribal sentiment as a result of the migration from the rest of the Qatari peninsula to the city of Doha itself. Again, going back to the maps, this one's taken a little bit to load. One of the claims that we do, or one of the variables that we look at in this map, is the exact same name that some of the municipalities have with the larger tribal group that resides in them, as an example of the relationship between this, let's say, tribal institutions and municipal constituencies. There's some explanation about how this works, with the Sheikh has been the main interlocutor for these two sides or institution, and one specific example, which is the Muntada district, which actually has 3 districts within, 3 for each. One of them which explicitly mentions or refers to the Sulaiti, one of the largest families in Qatar in terms of number, but also share of power. And although the district itself is not named after the tribe, you can see, or we can see, how this relationship exists. And I provide here a list of the elected representatives of the 2015 municipal elections. And if we check the district, we actually have a member of this family. Again, giving some evidence that how this relationship between tribal matters and municipal constituencies actually play out in municipal elections today, or in 2015 at least. It would be interesting to update this data with the results of the general election, but I haven't done that yet. It's probably going to happen in the near future. This is explicitly about, again, elections, but we have also looked into other variables, which are not loading in the map right now, but maybe if you open the link that I put in the chat, you might be able to check those. There we go. Well, we have the example of Al-Khor to move away from Doha and see if this was playing out in other places too, and some explanation with the the list of representatives and the Al-Manar family, etc., etc. Here we have a heat map with that counts the number of government buildings and its concentration in different areas, kind of trying to flesh out how, or to explain or look into which families in terms of share of power were getting more attention or less attention in terms of government buildings, such as ministries, water facilities, stuff like that. So we see some concentrations in certain areas. Of course, West Bay is one of the main areas as a diplomatic quarter, but also one of the most of the newest, so maybe not as relevant for our research as others are, but we definitely have other examples with some medical facilities, and I'll be done in a minute. Some other, where Qatar Petroleum headquarters are, and their relation with some of the families that are more involved into this. Of course, the city center is one of the most represented areas in that regard, also being the seat of power of the Al Thani since at least the 19th century, of the late 18th century, and again showing how this tribe with municipal constituencies played out in terms of other types. Here we have another variable, which is cultural, widely speaking, facilities. We have from mosques to cinemas to papers to nursery schools, Doha cinema here, cultural establishments in general. So again, to look into the relation between how density of population, tribal relations, and municipal constituencies played out in terms of another type of investment from the central authority. Again, if anyone is more interested, you have the link. This is open. Anyone can look into the map, and I'll be happy to ask any questions. So to end it here, as we asked at the beginning, do tribes still matter in terms of municipal election and bureaucratic institutions? I guess the answer is yes. So thanks everyone for listening, and I'm looking forward to any questions and suggestions, particularly now that I'm willing to get back into this project again after COVID. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do you have any questions? From the online audience? So Javier, I want to ask if you did visit Qatar in order to have to visit the places, and did you do that visit?
Yeah, we haven't really done the whole field work, but because the idea of the project was also to, I did some preliminary visits to check if, mostly focusing on infrastructure, to check if the divisions between districts were actually infrastructurally motivated or existing, or they were just blended with one another in a more easy way. The idea was also to have another more extended visit to also incorporate, because another part of the project was also 3D imaging. We wanted to actually visit actual majalis, and take pictures of them and map them and include them in our website. That was another part of the project, which again has been delayed because of COVID. But yeah, definitely visiting Doha was the centerpiece of this project. But again, things have been complicated over the past few years.
This is very interesting. I'm trying now to see the link between the various presentations in this conference, especially the relation between state, time, and also what Raheem presented, like the author verification, how we can decide that this book or this article has been authored by this one because they live in this place, and what kind of network they had during this specific period of time. Or for example, what Peter with us today as well presented yesterday about the scholars, which scholars matters in the mosques in the 14th Hijri century. So place is playing a vital role in deciding this kind of author verification, and in deciding also who is most influential versus who is not. So I was talking to Emad yesterday, and Emad mentioned something about the collaboration between the different contributions in this conference might bring us some amazing results here, the one presented by Hadil. We were talking about Hadil and Prishkov, yeah. So it's very interesting to see the digital tools or the computational tools here, and the link between the place and the time and the authorship. So thank you so much for the presentation. Thanks to Raheem as well. And if we don't have any further questions or comments, then we will move to the last topic. I just want to remind that the last session will be a presentation by Dr. Emad Mohamed, senior lecturer at the University of Wolverhampton, and primary investigator in the project funded by Qatar National Research Fund. Now we're presenting the Arabic Soviet modeling tool that has been developed under the project and the platform we have for this research project. So this will be at 3 p.m. It's 3 p.m. Okay. Yeah, I think we have. We want to come earlier, like
Thursday.
I see here and down. Oh, this is a different story. Okay, 2:30. Okay, so we have like 1 hour and a half lunch break, and then we come. We'll have the platform and presented by Emad. Full be for the invited to lunch too. Yeah, you are invited for a virtual lunch with us next year.
Lots of words. It's not true. It's just morphologically complex. And because morphologically complex, we have the problem that we treat kitab as different words, but it's actually not different words. They're different morphological realizations of the same text. And some of them are different words, like kitab, which is, announcement of possessive, which is actually 2 words. So, and in order to prove this, we look actually at the word kitab, and we see how many forms. So we have a kitab, which is time, kitab 7, kitaban, wa kitab, kitab, wa kitab, and so on. We have lots of morphological realizations of the same word with different suffixes and prefixes. Okay. While if we look at the English equivalent, we find only which occurs 229 times, and books which occurs twice, 5 times. So this is a problem that needs to be solved in Arabic. It's a problem because we're going to just say we have 60 million words in Arabic, we have 12 million words in Arabic. This is simply not true. It's just that we have different shapes, different combinations that are causing trouble, and we may want to do that. In order to do that, we have developed a system actually. That system does that morphological analysis and segmentation, and at the same time also add grammatic something. I need to stop sharing and share something just to explain how this works. So stop that sharing and let me share again. So how do I share again? Share again. And if you look here, it's not right now. Can you see that? Can we make it bigger? Control. Okay, I think you can zoom. Yeah, control plus and control minus. Yeah. So control plus.
You need to wrap text.
Okay. So if you look here, this is the Quran again. But what's different here is that the words are divided into the units, and each unit has a grammatical text. So, for example, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, we see that is a preposition, which is a noun. Allah is a noun prop, that's a proper noun. Ar-Rahman is made of the determinant, and Ar-Rahman is an adjective, and Ar-Rahim is also an adjective, a determinant plus an adjective. So this is one of the things that we have developed for describing the Arabic language grammatically. So morphologically, which means split the word into the basic component, and grammatically to say what each category is. If we look at any of that, then you get for example, and this is also the basic use of this ambiguation. So if you have a word that can be different things, not what is the I would say that, for example, mad is a relative pronoun, is pronounceable. You're dealing with ma fa'alta, okay? That's a relative pronoun. Like you can also say ma fa'ala khayran, that's a negation. So This evaluation is the main thing. We need to know. It can also be a question. Okay? So, so all these are different things. So what this is that it does not like the analysis and this ambiguation. It's an ambiguous word. And we use that in things, it's not a neutral device. The visualization will make it easier for people. We have it running, but we are trying to put it to a web page so everyone can use similar things like that. It's not finished yet, but we're going to see that. So this is one of the main outputs of this project. Building a tool. You give us whatever text you have and squirrel output the text like that. Now, I'll stop sharing and go back to the share again and go to Google Chrome. Share. Now, if you have something like that, we can now actually count. This would be probably a better idea. So let's read it first. We've read it, and when I prepare it a bit, and then let's see. From the beginning to the just the first 10 words. You can see it's now chopping it into different units, and then we will remove the tag, just count the words. We can do it either way, but just see. And these are the lexical components of it, divided into segments. Now let's actually count the top 100 segments in the Quran. And if we look at that, now it makes a little bit makes more sense. So where occurs 10,000? We can say we can see which way we can go, but just where. As occurs 8,000. Now remember, it's very close to the English. The English was 7,900, something like that. So now we have numbers that are starting to make sense. So we have, as you can see, these things, and these are look, a lot like the English we have been using. So, and then if we look, now we want to see how many unique words occur, how many unique segments occur in the original Arabic, and as you can see, it's 4,788. So, how many unique words are there in the Quran? 4,788. But if we do counting the naive way, it's counting everything together, you will get 14,000 something. So next time anyone is telling you, the Arabic language storage has millions of words, it has 12 million unique words, 70 billion unique words, and so on. This is not true. It's just that it's an artifact of the morphological system of Arabic. So that is. So now let's look how many, remember Kitab, various forms before, we take that. Now let's look at Kitab and see how many times it took us 265 times. Remember, last time it took us lots of time because different ways of representing things. And this is probably. So one of the ways that you can examine the things, you can examine things visually. We looked at how things are in the text and so on, but we can also examine them visually. So this is one way of looking at things. This is the word Umar. Okay, it's telling us that it's just made up of the conjunction there, the future participle there, the verb and the object pronoun. The means direct object pronoun has. And that's the verb aspect itself is made up of two units, na, which is the idle prefix, plural, which means المتكلم الجمع, والتقدم, which is the stem of it's glad because the stem is usually Now, if you want to analyze some piece of text, if you want to see which was the term more and so on, you get rid of everything and you focus on the stem. If you were here and you wanted to know to do authorship analysis, remember we did authorship analysis last time with Raheem, you get rid of the stem and use the because in authorship analysis we do not use the lexical stem, we use the functional grammatical thing. And this is just one way, if you want to do research in the humanities, using Arabic text, 99% of the time, you will need to put text this way, because otherwise you will arrive at wrong results. So, this is everything I want to say. This is how we prepare text for analysis. So this is about that. Now we have the book and the small little tools used to do these things, plus something else which is topic modeling. You saw that lots of topic modeling in the previous sessions. Topic modeling is basically a computational way of summarizing large amounts of data. You want to know what these documents are talking about. If you have 5, 6 documents, small documents doesn't make sense to do topic modeling. But if you have 1 million documents, if you have a whole book, for example, you have a book of 200 pages, and you want to know what the book is talking about, and it doesn't have a table of contents, for example, then if you use topic modeling, run it, it will give you the basic ideas, say, summarized in 200 sentences, for example, so it will do that for you. Before you use topic modeling, you have to run the text or something like that, otherwise you will get really, really strange and weird results. Now, I asked you not to ask me any questions. Okay, I know that I was kidding. I was not. Please don't ask me any questions. If you want to ask me any questions, please ask Sophia, because Sophia has been working on this more than half. She knows
the knowledge. It's the knowledge. I'm only technical.
And of course, if you have any questions, you're welcome to class. I answer 2 questions. If you want any more questions, you can just invite me to come and thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I enjoyed hearing.
You enjoyed? Okay, we can share it from your computer. I don't mind.
For more questions.
Don't ask me anything. I'm just trying to make my.
I do believe, however, that the research team do have many questions.
Dr. Talaat.
So Dr. Talaat, without even raising his hand, I know he has.
لا he raised his hand.
Okay. Yalla, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Emad, for this interesting talk and thought-provoking. You keep your humorous spirit always. I'll ask you, not Safiya, of course, because you're the one managing the technical side of the project. It's just a note, Emad. I noticed through the chart you shared that the word Ali is identified as a preposition. How can you determine the description of a word, a dotted letter like Ali from Ala? How can you clean or preset the file to identify the 2 different terms with the same pronunciation?
Let me share, and I think I might not have made this very clear. So I'll share again, and I'll show how this works. And share. Thank you, Todd, for the question. It's a very, very important question, actually. Let's look here. Okay. So remember QT, this one, and we showed here that there is prepositions, term, and so on. And what I'm going to do here so okay, so this has the grammatical, this thing has the grammatical descriptions, whether it's a preposition, whether it's a noun or a proper noun, and so on. So now we can say something like that. Okay. I'll just show you. because it's part of the search. So this is something very interesting. Now you want to get all the proper nouns in the Quran. So basically, give me all the proper nouns in the Quran. Let's do the noun proper. And we can see these are the most common proper nouns in the Quran. Right? Allah occurs 2,550 times. After that, Allah, different versions of Allah, in Lillahi comes in 149, then Musa, Jahannam, Fir'aun, Ibrahim, Quran, Shaitan, Rahman, Israel, Nuh, Maryam, Yusuf, Thamud, Adam, Isa, Jahim again, Ad, Harun, Torah, and so on. If you keep crawling, there is no Ali. Not there. Because Ali as a proper noun does not occur in the Quran. As a preposition does occur in the Quran. And what we can do here, just change something small because, you know, it might say, we're going to see here, prep. Now looking for prepositions, and these are the prepositions in the Quran. Men occur 3,149, sorry, occur 713. So this can distinguish between these things. As I said, the major function of such grammatical description is this ambiguation. It's telling us which category it is, and we can very easily know whether we are dealing with a preposition or with a proper noun, whether we are dealing with a question word or a negation word and so on. So, Farrouq, I hope this has been an answer, even if not a good one, to your question.
Of course, this helps in our research. But still, one last point I made, if you allow me. With the conjunction fa, how can you determine if the fa is part of the word, like fataha, or a conjunction like fa'asqaynakum?
Oh yeah, that's what the segmentation module does. It uses machine learning, and machine learning, you train it, you give it a few sentences, and some of these sentences have it as part of the word, some of it has not as a different token, you call it, and it can tell the difference. In most cases, it can tell the difference. Given enough training data, it usually knows which is which. Yeah. So this is there now. It's available.
Thank you so much. I'll keep the rest of the questions to the upcoming workshop.
Thank you.
Question from Mustafa.
So, my watching this, I started wondering if there is we need to integrate another layer that is capable, another programming layer that is capable of recognizing such. And it's very, because given Arabic such very logical structuring that you have certain morphologies that have certain meanings.
Yeah.
Would it be possible to include that in a way that would enable us not just to deal with the words on the descriptive level, but to delve even a little bit deeper into questions of meaning?
The question of meaning, there are other tools that do meaning, and you need, most of the time you need this analysis, morphological analysis. But the meaning is a different thing, and there are ways to deal with meaning. You can also disambiguate things. You can also find similar words. I wish I could show on my other laptop. There's actually one of the components is you give it a verse in the Quran, for example, and it gives you the most related verses, the most related language, the most related poetry, the most related anything. It gives you that. You can give it a sentence, and it's what we call semantic search. So semantic search, the regular semantic search, you give it a word, and it will find those words, this word, a couple of words in the text. Semantic search is a little bit different. So basically, you're looking for the word nice. You type, okay, what is the nicest vehicle in the capital of Qatar? Okay, and then you find the top result is the most gorgeous car in Doha. So this is semantic switch because it understands what you want. It doesn't. For the search engine, it doesn't matter whether you said vehicle or car, whether you said gorgeous or nice, whether you said a capital of Doha or a capital of Qatar or Doha. So you can also do that in lots of text.
What I was thinking of was more along the lines of for example, when we had to go back and find the roots in order to disambiguate and to avoid the repetition of words that are essentially, many words that are essentially the same. I'm just wondering if integrating stuff in there might be capable of producing a description of each word that is both capable of linking it back to its root and where it comes from, and integrate the different additions that are put there. So things that Munihan, it would be capable of figuring out that this is a verb in the past tense. And
actually, if you look here, if you look, this is just less as you can see, it's telling you that the is a preposition, ism is a noun, Allah is a noun, Ar-Rahman is made up of that is an adjective, and an adjective. Raheem is, if we, instead of Q, then let's see Q 30, just to get more. I was trying to figure out something. Yeah, Al-Alamin, for example. Telling you Al-Alamin is made of Al, which is a determinant, Al-Alam, which is a noun, and In is a noun, suffix, masculine, plural.
So can we delve into, for example, that this is in fact, and this is not all, and this might be, no, but it's not.
Yes, it's possible. And there are things that do it. It's not here right now, but yes, it's possible in terms of that.
Anyone else has?
So that level of numerical description is possible, yeah.
Does anyone else have any more questions to Dr. Emad? All right, so we'll go to the easier part. As part of this project, we have developed a topic modeling tool. I think someone will ask Dr. Salah.
Thank you, Salah.
We have developed a topic modeling tool for Arabic language in specific, which is something that does not exist anywhere online. And this is only the beginning. The tool is continuously being developed. So in order to access the tool or anything related to the conference today, the project in general, you may visit our website, creativearabs.org.
And by the way, the website is for the two projects, the one that's already done, the one on transcultural identities. Both projects have been funded through the Qatar National Research Fund. And one is done and the other one is almost done.
So this project is computational study of Arabic and Islamic culture. Just a quick note, all the recordings of this conference will be uploaded on this website under conference. Now to go to the tool, you just come to this page, the home page, it will take you to the DH in Arabic tool. It's loading, but apparently. Anyhow, it will take you to this page, as you can see. There's a guideline on how to use the tool, but I'll go over it very quickly. You go to the search bar, you click on it, you choose your file. I always recommend that you name your files, you organize them well. File preparation takes the largest number of time, but the better you prepare your files, the better your results are going to be. So don't leave any empty files. We are currently developing a graph tool that can also integrate date, so that will also be updated very soon with the how to use it. But let's for now choose 100 files. We click on it, as you can see, all the file names appear in front of me. I would click upload file. This can take, depending on the number of files that you're uploading, it can take anything from 30 seconds to 5 to 6 minutes. Also, and your internet connection as well. Make sure you're connected to a stable internet connection. It's very important to note that the maximum number of files at the moment is 2,000 files. The platform cannot take more than that. But the idea is after you upload files, all of these would disappear. these texts will disappear, and then we go to the processing. Now, for this topic modeling tool, we can choose the number of topics that we want, which is 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. So we have an integral of 10 up to 100, and then 100, 200, 300, 400, 500.
So this will depend on like if there is a specific like you want to see the most or the top 10 topics in a specific corpus, then you go with 10. If you want to go more, up to you. But if you choose 10, all the topics that you are looking for will appear there. So
yes, so more number of topics, as in 500, means that each topic will have a smaller presence or percentage, but it'll give you a higher number of topics. So the topics are more detailed. The lesser the number of topics, the more general the topic is, and the less the number of. But in general, I'm sure you've heard Dr. Amr's presentation and Dr. Talaat's presentation, and you've seen how they test with the topic modeling tool in order to see what exactly is the perfect balance or what they can be critically satisfied with in terms of these topics that they believe would present the corpus. Both Dr. Amr and Dr. Talaat actually have done this in order to choose and have connected multiple different topic models. This is really helpful to also understand how topics are related to each other. So after doing all of this, you would press process file. On average, each 100 files will take a minute to be processed. So if you're uploading 2,000 files, that's 20 minutes. So go have a coffee and then come back for it, and the file will be downloaded. What you will get, I'm not sure if you'll be able to see this. No, you cannot. I need to stop sharing this website. What you will get is a compressed file, .zip, which is this one. When you open it, you cannot, sorry. So this, I'm sure you can see it. So this is the file that you will get. You can use any uncompression software to open it, and what you will get is all the files that you have uploaded. As you can see here, I have uploaded all the files, and then I will get something called out keys. When I open out keys, I need to stop sharing this again. Share the out keys file. As you can see now, I'm getting my topic modeling. See, and I get these.
each set of words here represent a cluster, represent a theme,
Things like that.
yeah.
Maybe.
And each is 20 words each. Around,
More or less.
yeah, on average. And this is where you would get your files. Now, with topic modeling, you get keywords that are connected to each other. Again, the lower your number of topics that you choose, the more general the topic is.
And you have to type the clusters or?
This is what I want to talk about. Like, I'm not sure if you attended the talk by Dr. Umar, but Umar has this expertise in Al-Manar, and like doing that while you have some background, some knowledge about the topic, some knowledge about the content, it will be easy for you to get into, like, you identify the theme yourself, and based on that, you go with your research. So, like, you will not do some kind of like research on a big corpus without having some kind of like background about the topic, about the magazine, about what the content is.
Just a small thing. Sorry because I didn't attend some previous sessions. The topics are overlapping, or you can find some words in many clusters.
But together, they give,
Yeah, some.
you can identify the main theme here. Like if you're saying Marad, Farrouq, blah, blah, so it's related, like they.
And it gives you the theme or the field even. Like for instance, you can talk about let's say disease. It can be put Manab, jihad, So something like this. So this will give you the topic that there's a scientific approach to this topic. You know, it's related to war, but it's related to disease as well. But it can also be marad, so this will give you more of a doctor approach. It's more towards, you know, so it's the same word, but it's the combination of these words together that really creates the theme or the topic. And again, the lower the number of topics is, the more general it is. Would not be these very, very specific, or you get something more general. But with higher number of topics, the words become very, very specific, extremely specific, that it will take it to this direction in your research. And that is all for the platform. There are any questions on the platform?
It's a black box. How does this work? It's a black box. What's this? So now it's a black box. You just enter the text and read it. But which mechanism, which algorithm is?
Uses something called LDX.
Yeah.
Laser clip annotation, basically based in statistics.
You stem the, and using the stems you compare it on a previous model.
No, it's unsupervised,
Okay.
which means you don't give anything, and you just give it the text, and it will divide the text into the number of topics you want. So basically using matrices of correlation. So it's a lot of correlation, and these words correlate together all the time. So this makes a topic.
But it will consider that all the input is the corpus that need to be. Okay. So
It's a very
one text.
Sorry?
If the input is just one text,
By definition, you have to give it several documents to process. You can give it one text and treat, for example, each line or as a document, but you have to give it several documents.
it compares files as a.
It compares word frequencies and correlations. So
That's right. That's right. The first file is supposed to be one topic.
So let's think about it this way. It sees the word marad, and finds out that when you have marad, you may also have tabib. And when you have tabib, you may also have mustashfa. So, and does this. So marad, tabib, mustashfa, wizard. Okay? So we now know what the. It also finds marad another concept. That, you know, Sophia gave an example. Marad, Jouf, and so that's a different concept. And it keeps computing this correlation until it gives you, these 10 words usually occur together, these 10 words usually occur together, and these 10 words usually occur together. So it's a bunch of correlation calculations. Yeah.
The occurrence is calculated per paragraph, or you will segment the text.
Per document, and it asks you to tell it what a document is. In this specific example, each file is a document. If you have a book, for example, so you may want to divide it into pages or lines. It's up to you to decide what the document is, but it's a document. Each file is a document. So when I do it in a book, for example, I say, okay, every 5 words will be a document. It might not be a good choice, but 500, 1,000 is. And you experiment with that. Yeah.
Any other questions concerning the platform or to Dr. Emad? If not, thank you so much for being here. I will leave the closing remark to Dr. Eid, who is the organizer of this conference.
We already did the remark. Thanks, everyone, and I'm so happy that the conference did happen at the very end. I mean, I've been struggling with this conference for the last
2 years.
2 years, and we still have some more work to do. So I'm happy to share the good news that we have a new journal with Braille, and the journal is based on the project that the work conducted under this project. So we got the approval, and we will start with some of the interesting papers presented in this conference. Definitely, they will go for peer review, etc. But I'm happy that the project is able to secure a venue for work like the ones that have been presented over the last 3 days in this conference. This venue will help the expansion of the field itself, digital humanities in Arabic. And I think also what I mentioned in my talk about the collaboration between the different presenters, because some of them actually do work like complete or add to the work of others. So we'll be in touch. Thanks for our participants who were very keen to attend. Even some of them were in North America. The difference of time was sometimes over 8 hours, but they made it happen. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. And I should also not to forget to thank Apoya. She did an amazing work. Thank you so much. And she was not in Doha. She was outside Doha, and she was trying her best to like get in touch with the participants, arrange for everything. We have been trying our best to make this conference a success, and I hope we did. And I thank everyone who attended. Thank my students who compiled literature. And some of the presentations might look very technical, but I think it's a good way to get you introduced to this thing. And thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.